Chapter 1556. There were at least several thousand towers, and there were also more than 1,000 high-level saint-level experts here. There were humans, Oceanids, Celestials, and so on. Thousands of pagodas might sound like a lot, but compared to the thousands of high-level saint-level experts from the various races, it was actually nothing. Those 9-star martial saints could easily take the treasures from the 30-meter-tall towers. While the 7-star martial saints were still fighting with the guardians of the towers, the 9-star martial saints had already plundered a few towers. This kind of situation brought forth competition. An intense competition began. Chu Mu and the other 3 joined forces and rushed towards a 40-meter-tall tower. Beside them, an 8-star martial saint also rushed over. Scram! That 8-star martial saint was very domineering. "You are the one who needs to scram," Chu Mu shouted. The 4 of them were very coordinated. They stood in their positions and formed the true mysterious 4 divisions, sword formation. They raised their swords and slashed out. Dazzling sword light streaked across the sky, as though it was cutting through the void as it charged towards the 8-star martial saint. The 8-star martial saint's expression changed. His eyes were filled with shock and fear. After a pause, he retreated at full speed. After forcing back the 8-star saint rank expert with a single slash, Chu Mu's sword spun and the enormous sword light he slashed out also spun and turned, slashing towards the tower's defensive energy. With a loud boom, the defensive barrier of the tower stirred up layers of ripples. They spread out and trembled slightly. The 8-star martial saint that was forced to retreat didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood in the distance and watched. He didn't want to give up and wanted to attack again. Chu Mu didn't bother. As long as the 8-star martial saint didn't come close, he couldn't be bothered to deal with him. Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lian Hongyun all attacked with their swords at the same time. Their swords were rhythmically attacking the same spot on the tower's defense. Soon, the tower's defense was broken through. The 4 of them seemed to be one. They leaped up and rushed more than 30 meters into the tower. As soon as they entered the tower, they were attacked. The attacker was a monster. Its entire body was black, and there seemed to be a faint flame burning on its body. Its head was as ferocious as a demon's, and it had a single horn. Its thick arms bulged with muscles that contained an incomparably terrifying power. One could tell at a glance that this was a monster with terrifying power. The monster punched out, forcefully creating a vacuum. It contained astonishing power that could shatter everything. Chu Mu slashed out with his sword, and the tyrannical edge of the sword split apart the fist energy and rushed towards the monster. Borrowing the force of the recoil, he turned it into his own and slashed out again. Under the power of the earthquake, the sword vibrated at a high frequency, cutting through the vacuum and slashing at the monster's body again. As the sword array of the 4 divisions rotated, the 4 of them launched attacks without pause. This monster was extremely powerful, but its speed was relatively slow. It was completely unable to dodge the attacks of Chu Mu and the other 3. Dao Cutter Sword Style. The Dao Cutter Sword Style contained the spiritual impact of the God Cutter Sword Style, the unfolding of the Void Cutter Sword Style, the softness of the Flow Cutter Sword Style, and the toughness of the Extreme Cutter Sword Style. This 8-star saint-level monster only lasted for a short while before it died under the swords of Chu Mu and the others. The monster disappeared, leaving only one thing behind. It was a pair of black gloves. It looked like it was made of some kind of black metal, and it exuded powerful energy waves. This pair of gloves belonged to Chu Mu. Chu Mu put the black metal gloves into his pocket space. He quickly left the tower and rushed to the other towers. At this time, most of the towers had been opened, and there were only a few towers left that still had their defenses intact. After choosing a tower that was 50 meters tall, Chu Mu and the other 3 burst out at full speed and rushed over. Their speed had reached the level of a 9-star saint level. The 50-meter towers were the least in number, with less than 100 of them. they appeared to be more precious. Among the thousands of high-level Saint-level powerhouses from various clans, there were less than 100 9-star Saint-level powerhouses. In theory, there was no need to fight for a tower that was 50 meters tall. However, that was not the case. A tower that was 30 meters tall was equivalent to a 7-star Saint level, a tower that was 40 meters tall was equivalent to an 8-star Saint level, and a tower that was 50 meters tall was equivalent to a 9-star Saint level. In other words, without the strength of a 9-star Saint level, it was impossible to break through the invisible defense of a tower that was 50 meters tall. Although that was the case, the treasures in the tower were extremely attractive. Those 7-star and 8-star Saint-level powerhouses did not want to give up at all. There were thousands of high-level Saint-level powerhouses, and an even more intense fight broke out. The tower that Chu Mu and the other three had chosen was quickly surrounded by a group of 7-star and 8-star Saint-level powerhouses. "That's him," Yang Zhantian suddenly said, pointing at an 8-star Saint level. Chu Mu and the other two immediately understood that Yang Zhantian was talking about the person who had snatched their treasures. Kill! There was no need to say anything else. The four of them moved quickly and appeared beside the 8-star Saint-level powerhouse. They attacked with their swords. A sword pierced through the clouds. Under the surging clouds, everyone felt as if they were surrounded by clouds that appeared out of nowhere. Their movements seemed to be affected and slowed down. The 8-star Saint-level powerhouse shuddered as a chill surged in his body. He was so shocked that he did not even turn his head. He quickly executed his movement technique and turned into a series of afterimages. It was hard to tell which one was real and which one was fake. However, his real body had already been locked onto by Chu Mu. Now it was just a futile struggle. A sword pierced through the clouds and mercilessly killed him. It pierced through his forehead, and even his primordial spirit was crushed. He did not make a sound. He only widened his eyes and slowly fell to the ground. Someone beside him reacted quickly and immediately reached out to grab the interspatial ring on his opponent's finger. However, what greeted him was a cold sword light that was filled with killing intent. Making a prompt decision, this person unhesitatingly retracted his hand and recklessly burst forth with full speed. He even burned his essence blood and retreated at an unimaginable speed. He flew far away, afraid of being killed by Chu Mu and the others. He was too powerful. He killed an 8-star Saint-level powerhouse with a single sword strike. Another sword strike scared the other 8-star Saint-level powerhouse so much that he had to burn his blood essence to escape. The surrounding people were stunned. With a flick of the sword, the interspatial ring fell into Chu Mu's hand and was kept by him. The silver eyes of the heavenly puppet of desolation slowly scanned the surroundings. They swept past the faces of the 7-star Saint-level and 8-star Saint-level powerhouses. That cold and merciless gaze caused their expressions to change drastically. Scram! A cold voice came from the heavenly puppet. Coupled with those cold and merciless silver eyes, it made one shudder. "Don't be afraid. Let's work together," someone shouted. Just as he finished speaking, a cold silver sword light pierced through the sky and struck. With a slash, the two were cut into two. A mere 7-star Saint-level powerhouse dared to be so arrogant. Such strength and ferocity caused the other 7-star and 8-star Saint-level powerhouses to retreat. They were not as united as a single piece of metal. It was unrealistic to join forces. If they joined forces and broke through the defensive power of the tower, how would the treasures be distributed? Since they were no match, they could only retreat. The 50-meter tower was too difficult for the 7-star and 8-star Saint-level powerhouses. The 30-meter and 40-meter towers had already been exploited, and the treasures had all been taken away. After retreating, the 8-star Saint-level powerhouses suddenly targeted the 7-star Saint-level powerhouses. Since they could not get the treasures from the tower, they could only target the others. The 7-star Saint-level powerhouses were a good target. The 7-star Saint-level powerhouses seemed to have realized this as well. Without any hesitation, they immediately fled at full speed. No one wanted to be targeted and become prey. The 8-star Saint-level powerhouses naturally would not let them escape. A hunt began. No one came to fight for the tower on Chu Mu's side. The invisible defensive power of the tower was very strong. Only Chu Mu's dual swords could shake it. The roars of dragons and tigers, the vermilion bird and the black tortoise. The spirits of the 4 beasts gathered. With the support of the 4 beasts, Chu Mu's strength increased greatly. With the dual swords, he performed sword move. He wanted to break through the tower's defensive power in the shortest time possible and get the treasures as soon as possible. Otherwise, if someone did this first, they would probably attack the other towers. Time was everything. Every second was the way to go. One could imagine that the treasures in the 50-meter tower would definitely be better than those in the other 2 towers. This forest of towers was like a benefit for cultivators who entered the heart of the eternal sacred city. Of course, one had to be alive to get the benefit. If one was not strong enough, death would be the only outcome. The ripples continued to spread. Under Chu Mu's sword, the defensive power was constantly being weakened. Finally, with a pop, the defensive power was broken. Chu Mu and the other 3 immediately soared into the sky and entered the tower. They already knew that there was a guardian in the tower. Therefore, the moment they entered the tower, they were already on high alert. However, the strange thing was that they did not encounter any attacks. "What's going on?" Lian Hongyun was very surprised. "Be careful," Gu Luankong said. The interior of the tower was very spacious. There was only a ball of black light floating in the center. It was emitting a shocking energy fluctuation. In the black light, one could vaguely see something. The shocking energy fluctuation did not contain any danger. It was obviously a treasure. "Is there no guardian?" Yang Zhantian was very surprised. Everyone did not act immediately. Instead, they were on high alert. However, they did not feel any danger. They spread out their spiritual power and scanned the surroundings. However, they did not find anything. In order to prevent the other 9-star martial saints from coming to fight for the treasure, Chu Mu and the other 3 moved. They quickly flew towards the treasure. In a flash, they appeared in front of the treasure and reached out to grab it. When the heavenly puppet controlled by Chu Mu was about to grab the black light flashed and disappeared. Then, an extremely dangerous aura seemed to appear from the void. Chu Mu and the other 3's eyebrows twitched. Without any hesitation, they immediately used all their strength and moved to the side. Chapter 1557. The rainstorm-like silver sword light instantly dissipated. A black light filled with chilling coldness streaked across the sky. The dense sword light dissipated like snow under the scorching sun. A strong sense of danger followed closely behind Chu Mu and the others. It made their hair stand on end. They retreated, dodged, and attacked. A shadow followed closely behind Chu Mu. It was almost as if it was sticking close to him. The cold sword light emitted a shocking chill. Even though there was a heavenly puppet between them, Chu Mu could still feel it clearly. The 2 swords vibrated and circled, covering all directions without any blind spots. The tyrannical sword light spread out like a light ball covering every part of the body. Chu Mu caught a glimpse of the shadow and quickly retreated. The black light disappeared. In front of them was a black shadow. It was almost 2 meters tall. It didn't look strong at all. Instead, it was a little thin. It had short purple hair, and its exposed skin was black. It wore a half-mask on its face. Its eyes were black and purple. It wore a tight black leather armor and held a black short sword in its right hand. "Lowly humans, the heavenly puppet can't protect you." A strange and cold voice came from the other party's mouth. Chu Mu and the others were startled. Previously, in the 30-meter tower and the 40-meter tower, Chu Mu and the others had encountered monsters. During the battle, other than roaring, they couldn't speak at all. But now, this strange person in front of them could actually speak. The other party's words revealed that he wasn't a human. However, Chu Mu had never seen such a race. "Who are you?" Lien Hongyun couldn't help but ask. "Kikik, I'm a demon." The strange person laughed strangely. His tone was arrogant, as if Chu Mu and the others were just ants' prey. "I, Ancient Blade Shadow, will send you lowly humans on your way. If we're lowly, then you, the guardian of the treasure, can't even be called lowly," Chu Mu suddenly said. "Despicable humans, I want you all dead." As if enraged, the Ancient Blade Shadow roared. His voice became shrill as his silhouette flickered. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 9 silhouettes appeared. Their auras were identical, as if they were all real bodies. "Have a taste of our demon race's martial arts." As the 9 figures intersected, it was difficult to distinguish their trajectories as they charged towards Chu Mu's group of 4. "I don't care if you're from the god race or the demon race. I'll kill anyone who stands in my way." Chu Mu's eyes were as sharp as swords. Above his head, the spirit of the azure dragon stretched out, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. With a dragon's roar, his strength increased greatly, and the power of his sword became even stronger. What was certain was that if Chu Mu and the other 3 did not form the true 4-symbol sword array, they would not be a match for this devil. Even now, when the 4 of them formed the true 4-symbol sword array, they could only fight against the devil. This devil's attacks were extremely strange and fast. The dagger in his hand was extremely sharp and emitted a chilling demonic chi. Chu Mu did not dare to let the dagger touch the heavenly puppet's body. This dagger was definitely 10 times sharper than the black werewolf's claws. It could cause great damage to the heavenly puppet. Pure Yang. Chu Mu immediately activated his Pure Yang power. Vacuum. 100 battles. Red Fiend. Gul Wankong and the other 2 also activated their Saint Body's power. In an instant, the Saint Body's power spread out and covered the heavenly puppet, increasing the power of the heavenly puppet. If one used a secret technique, it would increase one's own power. However, the difference between one's own power and that of the heavenly puppet was too great. It would not be of any help to the heavenly puppet. However, the Saint Body's power was different. As long as one could control it well, they could let the Saint Body's power spread out and cover the heavenly puppet. Of course, the consequence of doing so was that the Saint Body's power would be consumed more than 10 times more than usual. It would not be able to last for long. He had to get rid of this devil as soon as possible. At this moment, because he was controlling the heavenly puppet, he did not use any of his own technique. It was not that he could not use them, but even if he used them, there would be no effect. For example, Chu Mu's sword realm could not affect the heavenly puppet because the difference between his own power and the heavenly puppet's power was too great. Furthermore, the sword realm could not increase the power and speed of the heavenly puppet. Although the sword realm could not be effective, the intent sword was still effective. It was a power that belonged to the spiritual level. With the help of the heavenly puppet, Chu Mu raised the intent sword to the extreme. The speed of the devil was extremely fast and their movements were strange. It was hard to tell the real from the 9 figures. Chu Mu's primordial spirit shone brightly as his spiritual power was consumed rapidly. He was able to capture the 9 figures. After analyzing, Chu Mu was very surprised. The 9 figures seemed to be real. The martial techniques of the devil race were indeed mysterious. "Change the formation," Chu Mu suddenly said. Gul Wankong and the other 2 immediately got ready. 4 symbols sealing the heavens. As soon as Chu Mu's voice sounded, the spirits of the 4 symbols above the 4 of them instantly shone brightly and spread out. Waves of energy spread in all directions. Following that, the spirits of the 4 symbols charged down and entered the heavenly puppet. Outside Chu Mu's heavenly puppet, there was an azure dragon. Outside Gul Wankong's heavenly puppet, there was a white tiger. Outside Lien Hongyun's heavenly puppet, there was a vermilion bird. Outside Yang Zhantian's heavenly puppet, there was a black tortoise. With the power of the four symbols, their strength increased. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The four figures moved with extreme speed. In the blink of an eye, they appeared in the four corners of the pagoda. Traces of energy were transmitted between the four of them. They were closely connected. That was the power of the four symbols. Four symbols sealing the heavens was an application of the four symbols sword formation after it was completed. Previously, Chu Mu and the others had not used it. This was because using this change would greatly exhaust the power of the four symbols. Exhausting the power of the four symbols was equivalent to exhausting the power of the four of them. However, at this moment, facing the strange and powerful devil race, they had no choice but to do so. This was because the devil race had the strength of a 9-star saint. Under the four symbols sealing the heavens, traces of energy sealed the interior of the pagoda. The invisible sealing power greatly affected the 9 figures of the devil race. Their speed decreased by more than 30%. Originally, Chu Mu had to expend a lot of his spiritual energy to capture them. Now, he could easily capture the 9 figures of the devil race. Four symbols strangulation. Four symbols sealing the heavens only sealed the surrounding space. When it was strong enough, it could even seal time. However, that level was not something that Chu Mu and the others could achieve now. The sealing of space was not absolute. It could only affect the target to a certain extent. The target inside could not escape and their speed was obviously affected. The four symbols strangulation was the real killing move. The spirits of the four symbols entrenched on the heavenly puppet absorbed most of the people's energy. They also absorbed a large amount of the heavenly puppet's energy. In an instant, the roars of dragons and tigers, the cries of birds and the roars of turtles filled the pagoda. An incomparably tyrannical power erupted in an instant. Outside the pagoda, some of the high-level saints were all alarmed. When they looked over, their faces were immediately filled with shock. Outside the tower Chu Mu and the others were in, an enormous azure dragon appeared. It rode on the white clouds and swam into the sky. Immediately after, an enormous white tiger charged into the sky. Around its body, gusts of wind blew. Next, an enormous vermilion bird that seemed to be burning with flames charged into the sky. Finally, a black tortoise that emitted an astonishingly heavy aura like that of the earth charged into the sky. The huge spirits of the four symbols occupied the sky above the pagoda and spread out in all directions. An incomparably powerful aura emanated from the enlarged spirits of the four symbols. When combined, it was enough to make many 9-star saints feel fearful. So powerful! What treasure is that? It actually has such a powerful force. I'm afraid it's not a treasure. It's a formation anomaly. Those who had seen Chu Mu and the others set up a formation and stimulated the spirits of the four symbols thought quickly and immediately came to an answer. So they are actually so powerful. Those 7-star saints and 8-star saints who had wanted to fight with Chu Mu and the others for the pagoda were all terrified. With such power, if the other party had the intention to kill them and directly attacked them, not many of them would have survived. At the thought of this, many 7-star saints and 8-star saints hurriedly left. They were worried that the 9-star saints would attack them when they appeared. The anomaly outside the pagoda was shocking. Inside the pagoda, Chu Mu and the others seemed to have transformed into the spirits of the four symbols. The four symbols of the azure dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird, and black tortoise swam rapidly. With an incomparably terrifying force, their figures charged through the ceiling sky. There were no blind spots. The 9 figures of the demon clan were destroyed one by one. There was no way for them to dodge. When everything quieted down, the spirits of the four symbols disappeared. The 4 heavenly puppets fell to the ground. Their surfaces seemed a little dull. Within the heavenly puppets, Chu Mu and the others were pale. Although casting 4 symbols strangulation mainly consumed the heavenly puppets' energy, which was the pure yang crystals embedded in them, the pure yang crystals required Chu Mu and the others' energy to guide them. However, the difference between their own energy and the pure yang crystal's energy was too great, so guiding them consumed a lot of energy. The four symbols' strangulation and the emergence of the four symbols' spirits would consume the power of the primordial spirit. This was the reason why their faces were pale. They felt a little tired. In a short period of time, they could forget about using the four symbols' strangulation a second time. Although the consumption was great, the result was remarkable. When the demon clan expert died, half of a mask was left in the air. It emitted a black and gold luster. Chumu reached out and grabbed the mask. He quickly put it into his pocket space. "Recover your power," Chumu said. Everyone quickly took out elixirs and consumed them. They tried their best to recover the power they had consumed. As for the power of the primordial spirit, it could only be recovered by itself. This was because they did not have a secret cultivation method for the primordial spirit. They also did not have elixirs to recover the power of the primordial spirit. Elixirs to recover the power of the divine sense were ineffective for the primordial spirit. Fortunately, the anomaly of the four symbol spirits had shocked most people. The 9 star saints were still fighting in the pagoda. This gave Chumu and the others enough time to recover the power they had consumed. Chapter 1558. Death was like a play. There were endless battles. Interests and conflicts were the main topic at this moment. The 50-meter tower was guarded by powerful demons. Every demon had the strength of a 9-star saint. They could easily kill ordinary 9-star saint experts. It was extremely difficult to fight against them. Not all of the 9-star martial saints who entered the 50-meter tall tower were able to successfully kill the demons guarding the treasure. Instead, a portion of them were killed by the martial techniques of the demons. The martial techniques of the demons were strange, powerful, and mysterious. The powerful ones could kill the guardians of the demons to get the treasures. The weak ones would die under the martial techniques of the guardians of the demons. Even their primordial spirits would be destroyed and they would disappear from the world. Chumu and the other 3 consumed elixirs and their powers recovered. The power of their primordial spirits also recovered a little. It did not affect their movements and fighting. However, they could not use the 4 divisions sealing the sky and 4 divisions strangulation again unless their primordial spirits recovered more than half of their power. Without the secret method of primordial spirit cultivation and without the elixirs to recover the power of primordial spirits, the recovery speed was naturally very slow. It would take a long time. Chumu and the other 3 could not stay in the tower and wait for their primordial spirits to recover. Hence, after their powers recovered, their primordial spirits would be enough to support their normal fighting. The 4 of them quickly left the tower and went to the other towers. At this moment, no one would complain about having more treasures. Spiritual power spread out. The towers that had lost their defensive power were defenseless under Chumu's spiritual power. There were still a few towers that still had their defensive power. It was obvious that they had not been exploited. However, there were already people rushing over. Chumu knew from the aura that those people gave out that they were 9-star saints. They were very powerful. Under the situation where they could not use the 4 divisions sealing the sky and 4 divisions strangulation, they could at most be in an undefeatable position. That was all. If they could not defeat them, there was no need to fight. It would be a waste of energy. After scanning with his spiritual power, Chumu chose a target. He brought Gulwankong and the other 2 and rushed over quickly. He jumped and entered the tower. The moment he jumped, the 4 divisions' sword formation was formed. The spirits of the 4 divisions gathered above their heads again, and their powers increased greatly. Pure Yang. Vacuum. Red Fiend. 100 battles. The power of the 4 sage bodies was activated at the same time. The instant Chumu leaped into the tower, he brandished his 2 swords. The resplendent silver sword light was like a meteor tearing through the darkness, like lightning that shattered the firmament. Under the dazzling sword light, the guardian of the tower was clearly visible to Chumu and the others. Unlike the demon from before, this demon had a strong body. He was wearing heavy black armor, and even his face was covered. Only a pair of bull-like eyes could be seen, but they were filled with ferocity. "I just killed a human, and here comes 4 more." A strange and deep laughter rang out from within the heavy black armor, reverberating in the tower with a buzzing sound. The demon from before focused on speed. His movement technique was bizarre, and his battle techniques were bizarre as well. However, judging from the appearance of this demon, Zhang Xian could tell that he walked the path of strength. He wanted to use brute strength to crush everything in his path. Whether it was speed or strength, Chu Mu was not afraid to fight. Moreover, this demon guardian had fought with a Sea Tribe 9-star sage expert. Although he had killed the Sea Tribe 9-star sage expert, he had consumed a lot of energy and was slightly injured. He had less than 100% of his strength left, at most 80%. For a 9-star sage expert, every 10% increase or decrease in strength was very obvious. The 2 dazzling sword light were shattered by the demon. The weapon used by this demon was a pair of black octagonal hammers. They were very heavy and could easily shatter a mountain. The 2 hammers struck, bringing with them gusts of black wind. They shattered Chu Mu's sword light and blasted toward Chu Mu with terrifying power. Zhang Xian shifted his feet and the 4 divisions' sword light moved, causing the 2 hammers to miss. The demon's every strike was very powerful. Even Chu Mu did not want to take that kind of power head-on. The best way to deal with an opponent who was good at brute strength was to use speed and agility. The 4 of them had mastered the true 4 divisions sword formation. After going through so many life-or-death battles and facing so many powerful enemies, they had reached a very high level. They cooperated very well with each other, and their movements were very fast. The sword slashed on the demon's armor, and countless sparks flew. However, it did not break the armor. It only left a very light scratch. Spiritual sword. Pure yang energy was vigorous and vast. It was effective against the devil race's devil aura, but its direct destructive power was not strong enough. The devil race's heavy armor had astonishing defensive power. If Chu Mu wanted to kill this devil, he had to break through its heavy armor first. The spiritual sword power of the saintly body would increase the sharpness of the 2 swords, making them even sharper. Gu Luankong and the other 2 knew that their attacks could not cause any damage to the demon. Therefore, they did not attack. Instead, they cooperated with Chu Mu wholeheartedly. As they advanced and retreated, they avoided the demon's twin hammers. Every time the twin hammers of the demon clan struck, the void would tremble. Countless ripples would spread out from the tower like endless waves, reverberating and surging endlessly. This invisible reverberating power kept attacking Chu Mu and the other 3, affecting their movements and attacks. This showed that the demon had mastered his own power to a very high level. In terms of strength, he also had a high level of attainment. The power of the spirit swords flowed through his entire body. Every part of the heavenly puppet seemed to be filled with sharpness. The nearby reverberating air currents were all ripped apart, unable to affect Chu Mu in the slightest. However, the price of doing so was huge. The sacred body's spirit swords were rapidly depleting and couldn't last for long. End the battle quickly. This demon had a very high level of attainment in strength. Chu Mu also benefited from the battle. If it were not for the lack of time, he would have liked to continue the battle and learn more. His speed was raised to the extreme. His sword intent was raised to the extreme. His agility was raised to the extreme. The spiritual sword power was also raised to the extreme. Level 9 sword power covered the blades of the twin swords. By doing so, he could further reduce the consumption of sword power. This was something that Chu Mu gradually figured out and mastered after countless battles. Good steel was the best way to use it on the blade. Under the influence of sword power, spiritual sword power and other powers, the twin swords of the Heaven Wasteland heavenly puppet hit the same spot on the demon's heavy armor. With an obscure sound, the heavy armor was cut open. The terrifying sword intent invaded, making the demon furious. A circle of black light spread out, with traces of blood. The strong blood chi rippled like a storm, blowing in all directions. The demon's body seemed to have expanded by 30%. The twin hammers that he swung brought about an even more terrifying hurricane. The furious demon's strength increased sharply. At the same time, his speed decreased slightly. His anger made him lose his mind. He was not as clear-headed as before. Chumu became calmer. As he moved, he attacked with his twin swords. Every strike went through the gaps in the heavy armor and hit the demon's body. The demon had an extremely strong body. It was much stronger than the sea tribe. Even so, it could not block Chumu's twin swords. Kill. After the demon died, he disappeared, leaving behind a pair of black armors. They emitted heavy energy ripples. He stopped the activation of the sage body. With a roll, he kept the black armors. The four of them immediately took out elixirs to recover their energy. After leaving the tower, Chumu and the other three wanted to continue looking for similar towers. However, they realized that it was too late. They were all occupied. With his godly soul power, Chumu found the 9-star saint who tried to steal the black werewolf and wanted to kill him. Without any hesitation, Chumu brought Gulwankong and the other two and chased after him. Repaying kindness with kindness and revenge with revenge had always been Chumu's principle. This 9-star saint was a 9-star saint. He used his trump card to kill the guardian of the demon and got the treasure. As soon as he left the tower, he had a bad feeling. Danger was approaching. When he turned around and saw Chumu charging towards him, his expression immediately changed. Remembering what had happened before, a sinister smile appeared on his face as he charged towards Chumu. The trump card that he had just used up was something that he had obtained after spending several decades and paying a hefty price. Now that he had used it up, his heart ached. He was just about to snatch some treasures to make up for it when someone came knocking on his door. Both sides approached, came into contact, and attacked. Two resplendent sword lights slashed out. The power contained within the sword lights stunned the 9-star Saint Realm Master. Only then did he realize that he had done something wrong. However, he had to release the arrow. He slashed out with his sword. This 9-star saint rank wasn't a sword saint. Although his sword technique wasn't weak, compared to Chumu, the difference was like heaven and earth. Under the attack of the two swords, the 9-star saint's swordsmanship was broken. He hurriedly dodged and appeared a few hundred meters away with a complicated expression. Chumu did not hesitate and chased after him. "Stop!" the 9-star saint shouted. Chumu's attack made him realize that he was an expert that could threaten him. If they continued to fight, the outcome would be unpredictable. He had already used his trump card to deal with the guardian of the demon race. He was not confident that he could kill Chumu and the others. Indeed, he wanted to obtain more treasures, but that had to be established under the condition that he was safe. Chumu did not care. He led Gulwankong and the other two to form the sword formation of the 4 symbols and chased after him. The two swords attacked again. "Damn it, are you crazy? I have no feud with you." The 9-star saint's expression changed. He did not wait for his death. Instead, he dodged and counterattacked. The 9-star saint was strong, but he was nothing in front of the sword formation of the 4 symbols formed by Chumu and the other 3. At this moment, there was a ripple in the sky. Every tower started to shake and let out a buzzing sound, which alerted everyone. All of them looked around. Soon after, they felt as if they were enveloped by an irresistible force. Under the reversal of time and space, the scenery before their eyes constantly changed. Then, they saw an incomparably huge city flying into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the crack in the sky. Chapter 1559. The ancient sacred city has left. Someone exclaimed, startling the others. The ancient sacred city had left. If there was a beginning, there would be an end. It had been 2 or 3 months since the ancient sacred city had descended. Some people had reached the center of the ancient sacred city and obtained the treasures in the center of the ancient sacred city. This was an end. Since it had ended, the ancient sacred city wouldn't continue to exist. This was the rule every time the ancient sacred city descended. The departure of the ancient sacred city caused many people to feel pity. The vast ancient sacred city contained countless opportunities and treasures. Since ancient times, every time the city descended, a portion would be taken away by the people who entered. Only a small portion would be taken away. After all, 2 to 3 months didn't sound short. 1 month had 30 days, 3 months would be 90 days. But to saints, it was still a short period. Sometimes, the time would pass in the blink of an eye if they went into seclusion. Hence, in the ancient sacred city, many experts didn't dare to go into seclusion to cultivate. Even if they obtained treasures, they wouldn't check and refine them. That would require time. Once they refined the treasures, a long time would pass and they wouldn't obtain anything else. Over 10 million experts entered the ancient sacred city, and the majority of them obtained opportunities. The only difference was the strength of their gains and losses. With such a large number of people, what they obtained in the end was only a small portion of the treasures in the ancient sacred city. It was hard to imagine how shocking the treasures in the ancient sacred city were. Another point was that even if all the treasures in the ancient sacred city were taken away, many people would still be willing to stay because the heaven and earth yuan qi in the ancient sacred city was incomparably dense and pure. It was a holy land for cultivation. The baleful blood qi in the ancient sacred city could even be used to temper one's yuan spirit. Unfortunately, the decision to leave the ancient sacred city wasn't something they could decide. Everyone stared at the departure of the ancient sacred city. They stared at the huge crack in the sky closing and the sky returning to its original state. Everything seemed like an illusion. Without the suppression of the ancient sacred city and the crack in the sky, everyone could fly. Many people floated in the air. When the ancient sacred city had completely left and the crack in the sky closed, they looked around and were instantly shocked. There were over 10 million people who had entered the ancient sacred city. It seemed like there weren't just these people. Kill! Chu Mu regained his senses and said to Gu Luankong and the others. He then charged towards the 9-star saint again. Because the myriad ancient sacred city had left, the 9-star saint realm expert was still in a daze. The 2 swords slashed over. Even though Chu Mu tried his best to restrain his aura, a 9-star saint rank expert was extremely sensitive to aura and danger. He immediately reacted and hastily dodged, quickly diving into the crowd. There were quite a few 9-star saint-level experts, some 8-star saint-level experts, and some 7-star saint-level experts. Since he had decided to take revenge, Chu Mu would not give up so easily. The 4 of them immediately dove into the crowd and chased after him. However, the drawbacks quickly became apparent. The opponent was alone and had the strength of a 9-star martial saint. His speed was extremely fast and he was very agile. He even purposely chose the place with the most people. Chu Mu's side had 4 people. The heavenly puppet's strength was at the peak of 7-star martial saint. He had to maintain the true 4 divisions sword formation to maintain the speed of a 9-star martial saint. No matter how well the 4 of them worked together, to the point where they could even match the agility of a single person, there were still limitations. For example, in a crowded place like this, it was very difficult to maintain the true 4 symbols sword formation while maintaining a high degree of agility. When Chu Mu and the others rushed out of the crowd, the 9-star martial saint realm expert was already far away. Forget it. Chu Mu stopped and said. In a situation where one's strength was not strong enough, there were many restrictions. With the combination of formations, it was impossible to catch up with him. However, Chu Mu had memorized the opponent's aura. Gu Luankong and the others also understood this point and did not raise any objections. Let's go and find a place to rest. At the same time, let's check our gains, Chu Mu said, and temporarily put this matter aside. Speaking of gains, Gul Wankong and the others' eyes lit up. This was what they were looking forward to the most. Wasn't the reason why they entered the ancient sacred city to increase their strength? Wasn't it for this exciting moment? Like Chu Mu and the others who left the ancient sacred city, all had the same thought. Nothing could stop the desire in their hearts at this moment. Very quickly, the experts dispersed and left. The sea race returned to the blue sea. The sky race also returned to the sky race. The experts of the various human forces also returned. The sea race's speed was very fast. Firstly, they had to hurry back to organize their gains. Secondly, they were worried that they would be killed. The sea race was indeed very domineering and could even be said to be arrogant. However, they were also very clear that this was the land, a place far away from the blue sea. After a period of time, when the situation stabilized, the human race might join forces to kill the sea race. Armed with the heavenly puppets, Chu Mu brought Gul Wankong and the others to the genius city. The heavenly puppets' strength and the fact that they could form the sword formation of the four symbols at any time gave them the ability to fight against a 9-star martial saint. Chu Mu originally planned to return to the genius small world. After all, as the only monstrous genius in the genius small world, he had a certain amount of authority. He could bring Gul Wankong and the others in whenever he wanted. However, Chu Mu was worried about one thing. That was whether the higher-ups of the genius small world would be greedy for the treasures that they obtained. The treasures that they obtained in the ancient sacred city were not to be underestimated. Even if he entered the cave and activated all the seals, he wasn't sure if he could prevent others from looking in. After all, that was the genius small world. It was managed by the higher-ups of the genius small world. Therefore, with this thought in mind, Chu Mu and the others found a remote mountain and opened up a secret temporary cave. They also set up all kinds of seals. The outermost layer was naturally the seals that hid the aura. If one didn't check carefully and have a certain level of attainment in the Tao of seals, they wouldn't be able to discover it. Hurry up and take it out, Lien Hongyan said excitedly. The treasures that they were going to check were the treasures that they obtained in the tower after arriving at the center of the ancient sacred city. As for the other treasures, other than what they obtained in the puppet underground palace, they were all obtained by Chu Mu before he met up with the others. They were his personal gains and didn't need to be distributed. The treasures from the puppet underground palace had already been distributed. Gul Wankong took out a pearl. It was about the size of a fist and was completely black. Black light was hidden within it and it emitted a strong energy fluctuation. The pure dark aura was shocking. After that, it was a pair of gloves. They were black metal gloves that emitted a unique texture as if they were filled with power. The gloves were taken out by Lien Hongyun. Yang Zhantian's gaze fell on them and he was attracted to them. Yang Zhantian's prey had been snatched away. Therefore, he didn't get any treasures. Chu Mu started to take out the treasures. There was a black and gold half-mask and a pair of black bracers that seemed to have a golden glow. These were the treasures that they obtained from the tower. Then, Chu Mu took out 2 interspatial rings. These were the interspatial rings of a 7-star martial saint and an 8-star martial saint that they had killed. Opening the 7-star sacred rank expert spatial ring, they glanced through the other items. There wasn't anything particularly outstanding, so Chu Mu and the others didn't pay too much attention to it. Instead, they took out the only treasure in the spatial ring, the one they obtained from the center tower of Eternal Sacred City. This treasure was a bracelet. It was a red bracelet that looked like a perfect red crystal. It emitted a shocking aura that was similar to killing intent. However, it was different from pure killing intent. When Lien Hongyun saw the red bracelet, her eyes lit up. Finally, it was the interspatial ring of the 8-star martial saint. The treasures in his interspatial ring were more valuable than the 7-star martial saint. However, those didn't attract much attention from Chu Mu and the others. What attracted their attention were the 4 treasures. "This guy has a lot of treasures." Chumu couldn't help but laugh. Then again it made sense. After all, that fellow was an 8-star Saint Realm expert. Other than the one Huang Xiaolong had obtained, the other 3 were probably snatched from him. It's good that he has a lot of treasures. In the end, they will all be ours. Lien Hongyun almost drooled. Although they didn't know what kind of treasures they were looking forward to it. After all, they obtained them from the tower in the center of the ancient sacred city. They shouldn't be disappointed. The last 4 treasures were a sword. A sword that was shining with silver light. It emitted a sharp and ethereal aura. It also had spirituality. Obviously, it was a spiritual sword. Although they didn't check it carefully, they could tell that it was a spiritual sword that possessed the power of space. Gu Luankong's eyes lit up and locked onto the spiritual sword. He couldn't bear to look away. The sword he was using now was the sky-piercing saint sword. It was hard to find a spiritual sword. It would take a lot of time and effort to cultivate one himself. Moreover, when he looked at it, he felt that the spiritual sword that possessed the power of space was very suitable for him. It was a feeling. There were 3 other treasures left. A pair of dark brown battle boots. It gave people a feeling that they were filled with power. It was as if they could trample the earth and shatter the mountains when they put on the boot. A long red robe. It emitted a murderous aura. There seemed to be a layer of light flowing on the robe. The last treasure was a ring. It was a silver ring. There were a total of 9 treasures. They were arranged in a row in front of Chu Mu and the others. Chu Mu and the others' eyes were burning with passion. It was time to distribute the treasures. Chapter 1560. Let's take a look at these first. What kind of treasures are they? We'll decide what effects they have. Chu Mu said. Treasures that were suitable for oneself were the best treasures. Otherwise, they would only be used as a collection or as a means of exchange in the future, nothing more. Compared to the latter, everyone hoped that these treasures would be useful to them, such as increasing their strength. The first item to be appraised was the fist-sized black bead, exuding rich and pure darkness energy fluctuations. The 4 immediately released their spiritual energy, covering the black bead as they carefully appraised it. A moment later, a preliminary conclusion was reached. For the time being, this treasure was named the Dark Demonic Bead because the darkness energy contained within it was incomparably pure. Moreover, there was a different kind of energy fluctuation, similar to the energy fluctuations of the devil race experts they killed, but much purer. The Dark Demonic Bead contains pure and dense dark magic energy. It's suitable for cultivators of the Tao of Darkness. It can increase the power of dark magic energy of cultivators of the Tao of Darkness, assist them in their cultivation, and deepen their comprehension of the Tao of Darkness. At least, this dark demonic bead had 3 effects. Unfortunately, none of them cultivated the Tao of Darkness, so this dark demonic bead wasn't suitable for them. It could only be used as a collection or an exchange in the future. The second item to be appraised was a black metal glove. As soon as their spiritual energy touched the metal glove, they immediately felt a surge of power. After further appraisal, everyone concluded that this glove could increase the strength of the user's hands, suitable for those who cultivated the Tao of Strength. Among the 4 people present, Yang Zhantian was a cultivator of the Tao of Strength. There are a total of 9 treasures. The 4 of us will be allocated 2 for the time being. Chu Mu said, The dark demonic bead isn't suitable for any of us, so let's put it aside for now. This glove is suitable for those who cultivate the Tao of Strength. Old Yang, if there are no accidents, this glove will belong to you. I've been eyeing it for a long time. Yang Zhantian grinned. Most of the 100 Battles clan's disciples cultivated the Tao of Strength. In addition, Yang Zhantian himself was a body cultivator, so his physique was much stronger than ordinary cultivators. Among the 4 people present, he was the most suitable for this glove. Of course, Chu Mu was also suitable. Although he didn't cultivate the Tao of Strength, he was a body cultivator. It could also increase the strength of his hands, but Yang Zhantian was more suitable. The third treasure was a black gold half-mask. It came from the guardian of the 50-meter-tall tower. It was very mysterious. After the appraisal, the four of them revealed shocked expressions. They were very tempted. The value of this mask far exceeded that of the dark demonic bead and the power glove because this black gold half-mask was a Yuan spirit secret treasure. Anything related to the primordial spirit was shockingly valuable. Primordial spirit mystic techniques, primordial spirit elixirs, primordial spirit mystic treasures, etc. After the appraisal, it showed that this black gold half-mask had the ability to increase the power of the primordial spirit and increase the defense of the primordial spirit. Just these two abilities alone were enough to make countless people green with envy. Unfortunately, before refining them, it was very difficult to know the level of these two abilities, or how much they could increase one's strength, unless one continued to appraise them in depth. However, that required extremely deep attainments and a lot of time in appraising treasures. Chu Mu and the other three were all monstrous geniuses. However, none of them had put any effort into appraising treasures. They could only do simple appraisals. This mask is suitable for any one of us. Let's leave it for now. We'll distribute it after all the treasures have been appraised, Chu Mu said. The fourth treasure was a vambrace. It was also a black gold vambrace. Upon closer inspection, it was covered with intricate patterns. The patterns were very intricate and mysterious. The shape of the vambrace was very exquisite. Within the exquisiteness there was a unique simplicity to it. The vambrace extended to the forearm and protruded slightly, protecting the joints well. On the other side there was a glove, a half-finger glove. In other words, this vambrace was actually a combination of a half-finger glove and a pure vambrace. After the appraisal, everyone was excited. This vambrace was suitable for any cultivator. It was different from the glove. The glove was mainly suitable for cultivators of the Power Dao. The vambrace had no restrictions. Similarly, the vambrace could increase the strength of one's hands and arms. It could also increase the speed of one's arms. This meant that it could increase the speed of one's attack and attack. In addition, the vambrace itself had amazing defensive capabilities. Yang Zhantian's eyes were burning with passion. Chu Mu's eyes were also burning with passion. Gu Luankong and Lien Hongyun were also excited. However, as Chu Mu said before, they would put it aside first. They would distribute it after all the treasures were appraised. The fifth treasure was a red vambrace. It gave out extremely pure energy ripples and evil qi. After the appraisal, it was confirmed that the energy within the vambrace was a unique evil qi. It was suitable for the cultivation of evil qi. It could also increase the strength of cultivators of evil qi. Chu Mu, Gu Luankong, and Yang Zhantian were not interested. Only Lien Hongyun was interested, because his saint body was the red evil saint body. Red evil was a type of evil qi. Lien Hongyun had already decided that he would take the vambrace when it was distributed. The sixth treasure was a sword. It was a sword with silver light. It looked a little transparent and gave out an ethereal and sharp light. It had amazing spirituality. This was a spiritual sword that contained the power of space. It was suitable for sword saints who cultivated the Tao of space. Gu Luankong's eyes were fixed on it. He could not take his eyes off it. The seventh treasure was a pair of dark brown battle boots. It was filled with iron blood and battle intent. It contained powerful energy that could increase the strength of one's legs. It also had amazing defense. The eighth treasure was a red robe. It also had evil qi. It was similar to the red vambrace. However, this red robe also had amazing defense. The ninth treasure was a silver ring. After the appraisal, it was found that it could not increase strength, speed, defense, or cultivation speed. However, it had other abilities. It was very tempting. Okay, 9 treasures. The dark demonic pearl is not suitable for any of us. Let's not count it now. There are 8 more treasures. Chu Mu said. He smiled at Gu Luankong and the other 2. Gu Luankong and the other two were also very conflicted. In fact, they all had their own ideas and goals. However, the black gold half mask was affecting them. If we can get all of them, we won't have to be so troubled. Lien Hongyan sighed. Everyone laughed. That was right. However, it was impossible. I don't think anyone will fight with me for this sword, Gu Luankong said. He grabbed the spatial attribute spiritual sword. He mainly cultivated the Tao of space. Indeed, no one was more suitable for this sword than him. Although Chu Mu also cultivated the Tao of space, it was not his main cultivation. This glove is mine, Yang Zhantian said. He grabbed the glove. The vambrace is mine, Lien Hongyan said. What else? Chu Mu did not choose immediately. He asked. I will give up the primordial spirit mask. Although I want it, I feel that this ring is more suitable for me. The second treasure Gu Luankong chose was the ring. Similarly, I will give up the vambrace and choose the battle boots, Yang Zhantian said. If you all give up, I will give up too. The robe is mine, Lien Hongyan said. Both the primordial spirit mask and the vambrace were very attractive. However, at the same time, the battle boots and the robe were very suitable for the three of them. They had to choose between them. Naturally, they had to choose the most suitable one. The dark demonic pearl is also yours, Gu Luankong said to Chu Mu. Yang Zhantian and Lien Hongyun did not have any objections. Speaking of which, it was all thanks to Chu Mu that they could obtain treasures this time. They were very satisfied. All right. Chu Mu did not decline. He waved his hand and the remaining 3 treasures all belonged to him. Refine them, Chu Mu said. I will go first, Lien Hongyan said. Among the 4 of them, he was the most impatient. He could not wait to see how powerful the treasures were. Lien Hongyun and Gu Luankong refined the treasures at the same time. Chu Mu and Yang Zhantian stood guard. It was not that easy to refine treasures. The 2 of them used a total of 7 to 8 days to refine their treasures. If they wanted to refine them further, they could only slowly nourish them. After the initial refinement, everyone knew how powerful the treasures were. Lien Hongyan's bracelet was called the Red Evil Heavenly Wheel. Its first function was to increase the power of the red evil by 20%. Its second function was to absorb the chi of heaven and earth from the outside world and transform it into the red evil power, nourishing the red evil sacred body subtly. Lien Hongyun's red evil sacred body was not complete, so it was very suitable for her. Its third function was to replenish the red evil power. The second treasure was called the Heaven Evil Robe. It also contained a shocking amount of pure evil chi. The first ability was the most basic defense. It was a defense that could weaken any attack by 30%. The second ability was to absorb the yuan chi of heaven and earth and transform it into pure evil chi to nourish the body. These 2 treasures were only suitable for cultivators like Lien Hongyun who cultivated evil chi. Those who did not cultivate evil chi were not only useless, but also harmful. The 2 treasures that Gu Luankong had refined were the Spirit Sword. It was called the True Space Spirit Sword. As expected, it was a space spirit sword. It also contained the power of vacuum, which complemented Gu Luankong's True Space Saint body. It could also nourish Gu Luankong's True Space Saint body. It could also nourish Gu Luankong's True Space Saint body and improve it. The other thing was that the True Space Spirit Sword was at the peak of the middle grade. It was only 1 step away from the upper grade. There were different grades of spiritual swords. For example, Chu Mu's Eternal Spiritual Sword was only a lower grade spiritual sword. However, it had reached the peak of the lower grade. Because of the power of eternity, the Eternal Spiritual Sword could be compared to a normal middle-grade spiritual sword. Gu Luankong's other treasure was called the Fantasy Ring. It only had 1 use, which was to create an illusion doppelganger. This doppelganger would have 50% of the original's power. It would not be afraid of being injured or dying. It would not affect the original. Chapter 1561. After Gu Luankong and Lien Hongyun had refined their respective treasures, their strength had increased tremendously. For example, Gu Luankong had the Void Spiritual Sword, which was a peak-grade spiritual sword. His attacking power had increased tremendously, and each of his attacks contained the power of vacuum. It was as if he was constantly activating the power of the saint body. In addition, when the power of the saint body was activated, the power of vacuum of the saint body and the power of vacuum of the spiritual sword would be added together, making them even more powerful. The doppelganger in the fantasy spirit ring had greatly increased Gu Luankong's survivability and fighting power. Together with his chaotic space 10 paths, his agility had increased, and his power had increased. Lien Hongyun's red evil heavenly wheel couldn't increase his strength directly, but when he activated the saint body, it could increase his saint body power significantly. A 20% increase meant that the stronger the red evil force that Lien Hongyun possessed, the more obvious the increase would be. Moreover, the red evil heavenly wheel could refine the red evil saint body and improve it. It could also increase the duration of the saint body power and increase his fighting endurance. The Heaven Ferocious robe provided Lien Hongyun with a strong defensive power. It could reduce the power of attacks by 30%, except for primordial spirit attacks. Even the attacks of 9 star saints could be weakened by 30%. His fighting power and survivability had increased tremendously. These treasures all had one thing in common, which was that they didn't have any limitations. In other words, they had a high limit. For example, although some treasures were good, they could increase one's strength and speed by one's level, but they had obvious limitations. Once one's cultivation level reached a certain level, they couldn't be used. Most of these treasures were suitable for people below the eternal realm. Treasures that were suitable for people in the eternal realm were usually based on the ratio of the increase. The treasures that Chu Mu and the others had obtained were useful even for 9 star saints and peerless experts. As for great emperors and holy kings who had surpassed peerless experts, no one knew. However, there weren't many peerless experts in this world, so the value of each treasure was immeasurable. Next, it was Yang Zhantian and Chu Mu's turn to refine the treasures. Chu Mu put away the Darkness Demon Pearl. He didn't refine it because it wasn't suitable for him, but the black gold half mask and vambrace were suitable for him. Chu Mu's refining speed was obviously faster than Gu Luankong and the other two. He only used 6 days to refine the first step. It should be known that Chu Mu's 2 treasures were better than the other treasures in terms of quality. After all, they came from the 50-meter-tall tower. After the initial refinement, he would know the name of the treasure and its detailed abilities. Lien Hongyun looked at Chu Mu anxiously. The mask is called the Black Gold Mask. It is an essence soul secret treasure and has 3 abilities. Looking at Lien Hongyun and Gu Luankong's expressions, Chu Mu smiled and said, "The first one is to increase the power of the primordial spirit by 30%. The second one is to weaken the power of the primordial spirit by 30%. The third one is to speed up the recovery of the primordial spirit by 30%. The 3 abilities of the Black Gold Mask were all 30%. Even if Chu Mu became a peerless expert, he would still have 30%. This was very significant. Gu Luankong and Lien Hongyun both opened their mouths wide. The value of the Black Gold Mask alone was enough to match the value of 4 of their treasures. However, although they were a little envious, they didn't regret it or feel jealous because the treasures they had chosen were indeed suitable for them. It would greatly increase their strength and survival ability. Chu Mu's second treasure was the vambrace with the half-finger glove. This vambrace was called the Demon Subduing Vambrace. It was made of rare materials and was very hard. It had amazing defensive power and even spiritual swords couldn't break it. The Demon Subduing Vambrace also had 3 abilities. The first ability was to increase the user's arm strength by 30%. The second ability was to increase the user's attack speed by 20%. a 30% increase in arm strength and a 20% increase in attack speed. Even if it was a normal Saint rank expert, the increase was rather obvious, let alone a body cultivator like Chu Mu. His powerful Saint body gave him powerful strength and outstanding speed. A 30% increase in arm strength and 20% increase in attack speed was extremely shocking. To put it simply, if Chu Mu punched out 100,000 pounds with a 30% increase, it would reach 130,000 pounds. Sometimes, people could barely resist 100,000 pounds, but 130,000 pounds would cause serious injuries. A 20% increase in attack speed was also a 20% increase in sword attack speed. Originally, in 5 sword attacks, he could attack 6 times. One extra sword attack couldn't be underestimated. Other than the 30% increase in arm strength and attack speed, the third ability was an active ability called the Demon Subduing Power. Once the Demon Subduing Power was activated, it would increase the user's arm strength by 50% and attack speed by 30%. In other words, when the Demon Subduing Power was activated, Chu Mu's arm strength would increase by 80%, and his attack speed would increase by 50%. Moreover, he had the real Demon Subduing Power. The so-called Demon Subduing Power was a kind of power, such as the power of stars, pure Yang power, vacuum power, red evil power, and so on. It could also be used to refine a saint body. The Demon Subduing Power, as the name implied, meant to subdue demons. However, the Demon Subduing Power was very rare. Using the Demon Subduing Power to refine a saint body only existed in ancient times. It was extinct now. Therefore, at present, it seemed that the Demon Subduing Power was only useful for increasing arm strength and attack speed. As for the power of the Demon Subduing Power, it seemed to be useless. Suddenly, Chu Mu thought of the demon race in the tower. Would the demon race be targeted by the Demon Subduing Power? Chu Mu didn't think too much about it, because it was still unknown whether he would encounter the demon race in the future. If he did, he could try the power of the Demon Subduing Power. After the initial refinement, the black gold mask was worn on Chu Mu's primordial spirit, covering half of his face, adding a sense of mystery. When the black gold mask was worn on the primordial spirit's face, Chu Mu could feel that his primordial spirit seemed to be more condensed and stronger. That was the result of the 30% increase. As for the 30% decrease, it would only be effective when the primordial spirit attacked. As for the 30% increase in recovery speed, it could only be felt after the primordial spirit's power was consumed. With the defense of the red and orange rings of the rainbow ring, plus the increase and decrease of the black gold mask, even if it was a level 3 primordial spirit attack, Chu Mu could completely resist it. After the Demon Subduing Vambrace was refined, it disappeared into Chu Mu's arms. Under the skin, it couldn't be seen, but Chu Mu could feel its existence. It was very magical. Moreover, without summoning the Demon Subduing Vambrace, the defensive power of Chu Mu's arms was better than the other parts of his body. After another 2 days, Yang Zhantian had also refined the 2 treasures. The metal gloves were called the Grip of Power. As Chu Mu and the others had appraised, it could increase the strength of the hands by 20%. If one had a certain level of attainment in the path of power, it could increase the strength of the hands by 30%. Moreover, with the activation of the path of power, it could stimulate a crushing force that could crush the target. In comparison, although it wasn't as good as Chu Mu's Demon Subduing Vambrace, it was still very powerful. The other treasure was a pair of battle boots called the Heavy Mountain Battle Boot. It increased the strength of the legs by 20%. When the feet stepped on the ground, it could absorb the power of the earth to replenish the body's consumption. It could also guide part of the attack to the ground. Once activated, it could trample the earth or the void, causing the earth or void to tremble and spread out to affect the surroundings, causing the weak to directly explode. This move was called the Heavy Mountain Trample. It was very suitable for group battles. The grip of power and the heavy mountain battle boots also increased Yang Zhantian's strength significantly. Especially when fighting on the ground, Yang Zhantian's strength would be even more terrifying. After dividing the treasures, everyone had gained a lot. They were all beaming with joy and happiness from the bottom of their hearts. During the trip to the Eternal Sacred City, not only did everyone successfully break through to the Eternal Sacred Realm, but they also gained additional benefit. They were stronger than ordinary Eternal Realm experts, and after that, they gained many opportunities and treasures. Their strength continued to rise. So far, the best one was Tianzhu. It allowed them, who were only 1-star saints, to possess the strength of a peak 7-star saint. Although they were monstrous geniuses, they didn't know how long it would take for them to cultivate to the peak 7-star saint realm. In the long run, the treasures that they got later had more potential. Now that we are stronger, we can only be considered average among the experts in the deep blue world. We can even be considered to be at the bottom. Gulwankong said. He wasn't complacent because of this. The others nodded. This was the truth. Even if they had more treasures to increase their strength, they wouldn't be able to reach the heavens in a single step. I realized that following Chu Mu has better luck. Tell me, what are we going to do next? Lian Hongyun looked at Chu Mu and asked. Our goal here is to find the spirit of the world and gain its recognition. Then we can control this world. Chu Mu said, until now, only the deep blue god pearl is related to the spirit of the world. Now that we have 4 deep blue god pearls, we need to find other deep blue god pearls. Chu Mu said, however, other than us, there are other races in the ancient god world. If any of them are still alive, they will definitely be moving in the dark. Also, there are some experts in the deep blue world. From what I know, there is a strong force called the Imperial Court. They are also working hard for the deep blue god pearls. We have many strong opponents, so the most important thing is to increase our strength. Gulwankong and the others nodded. Moreover, with just our strength, no matter how much we increase our strength, we can't become peerless experts in a short period of time. It will undoubtedly take a lot of time. It might take hundreds of years or even longer. Therefore, we need more strength. I have 2 plans. One is to gather the sword cultivators who entered the deep blue world. The more people, the stronger. The other is to develop the real sword sect. If the real sword sect becomes stronger, it will be more beneficial for us to establish ourselves in this world. Chapter 1562. A sky-blue oval-shaped flying ship flew across the sky and left quickly. Chu Mu, Gulwankong, Yang Zhantian and Lian Hongyun were in the flying ship. The flying ship was heading towards the Kanglan Empire. Chu Mu didn't return to the genius small world because there was no need to. He was in a hurry to return to the true sword sect. He planned to settle the profound sun world in the true sword sect and make it the forbidden area of the true sword sect. There was still some distance between the ancient heaven domain and the Kanglan Empire. This flying ship was Chu Mu's spoils of war. He got it from the interspatial ring of the 8-star saint expert. As spoils of war, there was more than one flying ship. However, other than the extreme peak that the heavenly sword saint Venerable lent to Chu Mu, this sky-blue flying ship was the most outstanding. It would take a long time to return to the true sword sect. Everyone stayed in the flying ship to cultivate. The trip to the ancient sacred city was all about fighting and searching for opportunities. They didn't have time to digest what they had gained. Now that they were on the way back, they could cultivate quietly. They could digest what they had gained from the trip to the ancient sacred city and turn it into their own strength. The descent and departure of the ancient sacred city had caused an obvious change in the hierarchy of the experts in the deep blue world. Refining the treasures had greatly increased the strength of many saints. At the same time, many people had gone into seclusion to refine the treasures and meditate. They had also absorbed the treasures they had obtained in the ancient sacred city. When they came out of seclusion, their strength would be further strengthened. The Kanglan Empire is in front. Chu Mu said in the sky blue flying ship. I haven't been to the Kanglan Empire yet, Lien Hongyun said. When they entered the deep blue world, everyone was separated. Most of them died from the pursuit of the experts in the deep blue world. Only a small number of them managed to escape. The small number of people who managed to escape were hunted down for a period of time, and many of them died. For example, Chu Mu managed to escape from the pursuit of a middle-level saint expert. He entered the Five Spirits' secret realm and stayed there for half a year. The pursuit had already ended. Gu Luankong and the other two only managed to escape after exhausting all their means. Of course, this was also due to the protection of the Heavenly Green List. After Chu Mu escaped, he entered the Five Spirits' secret realm, which was located in the Kanglan Empire. Gu Luankong and the others, on the other hand, found their fortuitous encounters in other regions. After that, they entered the ancient Heaven region and met up with Chu Mu in the ancient sacred city. Naturally, they didn't come to the Kanglan Empire. After this period of meditation, everyone had improved. This improvement was not directly reflected in their strength. After all, it was not that easy to improve one's strength. However, their potential had increased, and their future path had become clearer. This was very important. From the looks of it, the four of them seemed to be slightly different from before. Their eyes were brighter and more spirited. Not long after, the flying ship entered the territory of the Azure Water Empire, and headed in the direction of the True Sword Sect. As they approached the True Sword Sect, the flying ship lowered its altitude slightly and looked down. At some unknown time, a town had risen up. Chu Mu remembered that before he left, this place was empty. From the looks of it, this should be the result of the True Sword Sect's development. As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, even his chickens and dogs will follow. Although it wasn't that exaggerated, the True Sword Sect wasn't strong at first. However, because of Chu Mu, they gradually became stronger and developed. As they developed, they would naturally affect everything around them. It was very normal for them to lead other developments. Not long after, the flying ship arrived at the True Sword Sect's mountain gate. This was an unfamiliar flying ship. To avoid unnecessary trouble, Chu Mu landed the flying ship. The four of them walked out of the flying ship. After putting away the flying ship, they walked towards the True Sword Sect's mountain gate. Not bad. This mountain gate is very impressive. Lien Hongyun looked around and said as she walked. There were 4 low-level Nirvana Realm disciples guarding the mountain gate. Using low-level Nirvana Realm disciples to guard the mountain gate was a form of deterrence. Secondly, it would be easier to deal with unexpected situations. Thirdly, if someone attacked, the Nirvana Realm disciples could at least hold on for a while and inform the other disciples and higher-ups of the sect. Of course, it would be more ideal to use Saint Realm experts to guard the mountain gate. However, Saint Realm experts were very important to any sect. It had been 2 years since Chu Mu left the True Sword Sect. 2 years was very short, but for the True Sword Sect, it was very good. It allowed the True Sword Sect to further consolidate its development. In the past 2 years, he had basically spent all of it on consolidating the sect. Development was a must, but blind development was a taboo. This was also the strategy Chu Mu had set when he left. Therefore, in these 2 years, the sect didn't recruit any more disciples. Of course, there were some new disciples who came because of the sect's reputation. They joined the True Sword Sect by challenging the sect. The 4 disciples guarding the mountain gate were recruited 2 years ago when the mountain gate opened, so they recognized Chu Mu. When they saw Chu Mu, the 4 of them stared blankly, not daring to believe their eyes. When Chu Mu walked closer, the 4 of them finally reacted and hurriedly bowed respectfully in a sword salute. Disciple greets sect master. The 4 of them moved in unison. Not bad. After 2 years of cultivation, your cultivations have all improved. Keep it up. Chu Mu looked at the 4 of them and nodded slightly with a smile. He gave them encouragement. The 4 of them were instantly excited. They admired Chu Mu a lot. 2 years ago they came because of his reputation. It was an unprecedented feat for a Nirvana realm expert to kill a Saint realm expert. He immediately became their idol. In these 2 years of cultivation in the True Sword sect, they personally practiced the sword techniques that Chu Mu created and so on. The admiration in their hearts skyrocketed. Guard the mountain gate well, Chu Mu said again. Yes. The 4 of them immediately stood up straight. Their auras shot up into the sky as they replied in unison. That aura caused Gul Wankong and the other 2 to be taken aback. Soon after, they laughed. They were filled with admiration in their hearts. They didn't expect that their sect leader would be so well loved. He led Gul Wankong and the other 2 into the mountain gate. The 4 of them looked like they were taking a stroll in the park. However, their speed wasn't slow at all. Often, before people could react, they had already left behind a shadow. That person looks familiar. There are 4 of them. Who are you talking about? The one in the front. The one in the starry robe. He frowned and looked like he was thinking hard. Suddenly, he clapped his hands and his eyes widened. His face was filled with surprise and excitement. He said loudly, I remember now. It's the sect master. He's the sect master. The sect master is back. When his voice spread out, it immediately caused a commotion. The sect master is back? Where is he? The disciples of the True Sword sect looked around. The words, the sect master is back, caused a huge commotion. Chu Mu had already brought Gul Wankong and the other 2 to the main hall of the sect master's peak. As the sect master of the True Sword sect, Chu Mu had returned. All the elders who were in the True Sword sect and weren't in seclusion all rushed over to greet him. Sect master, your cultivation? When the first elder saw Chu Mu, he immediately realized that Chu Mu's aura was different from before. He was shocked. I gained something in the ancient sacred city. My cultivation broke through to the ancient realm. Chu Mu smiled and replied. Congratulations, Grandmaster. All the elders revealed looks of joy as they smiled from the bottom of their hearts. When Chu Mu was in the Nirvana realm, he already had shocking strength. When he was at the 7th sky of the Nirvana realm, he could kill a 2-star martial saint. Now that he was at the 1st sky of the ancient realm, his strength had increased by thousands of times. Given sect master's strength, you should be able to defeat a 3rd sky of the ancient realm. The 3rd elder said. No, I think sect master's strength can defeat a 4th sky of the ancient realm. The 2nd elder said. Chu Mu didn't say how strong he was now. He left it to the others to guess. What happened in the sect in the 2 years that I was gone? Chu Mu asked. When the ancient sacred city descended, no one else except for Chu Mu had entered it. It was a place to harvest opportunities, but at the same time it was a meat grinder. It was extremely dangerous. Hearing Chu Mu's words, an elder immediately reported the development of the True Sword sect in the past 2 years. As expected, the True Sword sect had developed too quickly 2 years ago. They focused on digesting and consolidating their strength in the past 2 years. Even so, the overall strength of the sect had increased significantly. After 2 years of consolidation, every disciple's cultivation had increased significantly. Some of the geniuses had even more obvious improvements. Moreover, the True Sword sect was a sword cultivation sect. Chu Mu's self-created sword techniques and some of the sword techniques he brought back from the forest of 1,000 sword steels were incomparably mysterious and unpredictable. After cultivating them, they would become even stronger. It could be said that the overall strength of the True Sword sect was more than 30% stronger than 2 years ago. Don't underestimate this 30% increase. It was enough to raise the overall strength of the True Sword sect to a whole new level. After understanding the development of the True Sword sect in the past 2 years, Chu Mu also asked about the 10 esoteric disciples. Li Donglai, who he introduced, was one of the 10 esoteric disciples. Is there any other news? Chu Mu asked. As the master of a sect, he had to consider more and understand more. Something happened not long ago, the third elder said. On the way back to the Blue Sea, the sea race was intercepted by the human race. After a huge battle, both sides suffered losses. When Chumu heard this, he immediately laughed. He immediately understood what was going on. That group of sea race was definitely returning to the Blue Sea after leaving the ancient sacred city. It wasn't strange for them to be intercepted. After all, they must have gained a lot in the ancient sacred city. According to the third elder, the sea race lost almost half of their forces. They had to use many trump cards to escape. Although the human race also suffered a lot of losses, the continent was still the human race's world. A well-prepared interception would result in more losses than gains. This time, the sea race is going to cry. Chumu smiled. The losses in the ancient sacred city, the losses from being intercepted, and the deaths of many sea race experts were huge. The Emperor Shark clan's Emperor Shark Jade escaped, right? Yes, the third elder said. It's lucky that he didn't die, but… Chumu smiled. A trace of killing intent flashed across his eyes. Chapter 1563. The True Sword Sect had the Wind Trust Hall, which specialized in collecting and analyzing information. Therefore, it didn't take long for Chumu to find out how many people had entered the ancient sacred city and how many people had left alive after the ancient sacred city had left. Myriad ancient sacred city is full of opportunities, but also full of danger. After learning of this, Chumu couldn't help but sigh. The number of people who had entered the ancient sacred city, including the Nirvana realm and Eternal realm experts, was more than 10 million. However, after the ancient sacred city had left, only less than 5 million people had survived. In other words, more than 5 million people had died in the ancient sacred city. They weren't ordinary people, they were at least high-level Nirvana realm experts, and most of them were Eternal realm saint experts. Even though most of them were low-level saint experts, it was still shocking. In the entire deep blue world, there were hundreds of millions of people from various races. However, only a small portion of them could cultivate to the Eternal realm, and it would take at least a few hundred years. Hundreds of years of hard work, all for nothing. After finding out, Chumu and the others couldn't help but feel a chill down their spines. If so many people had died every time the ancient sacred city descended, it was no wonder that there was an endless amount of evil aura in the ancient sacred city. However, this was something that could not be helped. Walking on the path of cultivation was not about stability. Unless one retired, got married, had children, and was willing to be ordinary, otherwise, if one wanted to go further on the path of cultivation, obtain greater strength and a higher status, one had to constantly work hard. For cultivators, hard work was necessary, but it didn't mean that one could reap rewards just because they worked hard. Cultivation was about resources. No matter how talented a person was, no matter how hard they worked, without enough resources, the height they could reach in the end was limited. For example, in the ancient sword continent, no matter how talented a person was, it was difficult to advance to the Eternal realm and become a true saint expert. This was the limit of the cultivation environment. Cultivation environment, opportunities, treasures, and so on were all indispensable on the path of cultivation. In order to obtain a better cultivation environment, opportunities, and treasures, one had to pay a price. This price was often accompanied by a life and death crisis. This had been the case since ancient times. Gulwankong and the other two stayed in the Real Sword sect for the time being. Although the cultivation environment in the Real Sword sect was not as good as in the ancient sacred city, it was still okay. However, once one reached the Eternal realm, it would not be so easy to raise one's cultivation level. Gulwankong and the other two had also become guest elders of the True Sword sect. Therefore, they could read the books and sword arts of the True Sword sect as they wished. The sword skills brought out from the forest of 10,000 sword steels of the True God Sword sect were extremely profound. Gu Luankong and the other two were completely immersed in it, comprehending swordsmanship, practicing cultivation techniques, and tempering the saint body. In the few days after Chu Mu returned to the True Sword sect, he understood the big and small matters of the True Sword sect and began to make big move. This time, Chu Mu planned to fix the profound Sun realm within the True Sword sect. This was a big event, but Chu Mu did not intend to publicize it. If the profound Sun realm settled in the True Sword sect, it would greatly increase the foundation of the True Sword sect. If the outside world knew about this, it might attract unwanted attention and bring about some trouble. Moreover, if the profound Sun realm settled in the True Sword sect, even if it was not publicized, it could become the last gate of the True Sword sect. Therefore, Chu Mu gathered all the martial saints of the True Sword sect at the main peak of the Tao sect and entered the deepest part of the sect master's hall. Every martial saint was very confused. They did not understand why Chu Mu gathered all of them in the deepest part of the sect master's hall. During this trip to the ancient sacred city, I obtained a small world. I plan to settle this small world in the True Sword sect and make it the True Sword sect's small world, Chu Mu said directly. Small world. The martial saints' eyes immediately widened. Some of their eyeballs almost popped out of their socket. They were very clear that ordinary sects did not have small world. Only those powerful sects had the qualifications and ability to possess small world. In the entire Azure Wave Empire, including the Azure Wave Imperial family, there were no more than 10 forces that possessed small world. One must know that there were more than 10,000 sects and forces in the Azure Wave Empire. Out of more than 10,000 forces, only less than 10 of them had small world. From this, one could imagine how precious a small world was. And those forces that possessed small worlds were very powerful. In the entire Deep Blue world, they were at least first-rate forces. If people knew that the True Sword sect, which could only be considered a second-rate force, was going to possess a small world, they would definitely be targeted. At that time, it would be a disaster. Perhaps even the Azure Wave Imperial family would be tempted to make a move and seize it by force. Chu Mu naturally understood this point. Therefore, the martial saints that he had gathered were all people that truly belonged to the True Sword sect. The 7 elders were originally the supreme elders of the True Sword sect. They wholeheartedly sought development for the True Sword sect and were incomparably loyal to the True Sword sect. The other 3 were Sword Saint Mei Lin Wenfei, Long Yi and the others. These 3 were contracted by Chu Mu and followed Chu Mu as their master. Chu Mu also trusted Gu Luankong and the other 2. However, they were currently in seclusion to comprehend the sword technique. Therefore, they did not come. The martial saints all took action. They tried their best to seal off the surroundings to ensure that their auras would not leak out. Chu Mu took out the mystic Yang realm bead. Everyone's gaze was immediately attracted to it. It was like a magnet attracting iron shavings. They could not shift their gazes away. The mystic Yang realm bead had already been completely refined by Chu Mu. He was the master. Therefore, Chu Mu could freely control it. With a thought, the mystic Yang realm bead left Chu Mu's palm and flew up. It emitted a bright red light. A warm aura spread out, making people feel extremely comfortable. What kind of power is this? Such pure power. All the saint-level experts were astonished. This is Yang Qi. One step further and it will be pure Yang Qi. Chu Mu said. When the elders heard this, they immediately became excited. Sect Master, is there a lot of pure Yang Qi in this small world? The 4th elder's eyes lit up as he asked. It's all right. Chu Mu replied with a smile that did not look like a smile. The elders were depressed. What did he mean by it's all right? More or less. This world is called the mystic Yang realm. The heaven and earth Yuan Qi is thin, but the Yang Qi is pure and rich. The mystic Yang palace is filled with pure Yang Qi. Chu Mu did not tease the elders. He explained, The mystic Yang realm automatically absorbs the heaven and earth Yuan Qi from the outside world and transforms it into Yang Qi. After being absorbed by the mystic Yang palace, it transforms into pure Yang Qi. If you cultivate in the mystic Yang palace for a long period of time, the elders may be able to condense a pure Yang body and cultivate a pure Yang saint body. Chumu added. Suddenly, every martial saint's breathing quickened. The strongest among them was a 6-star martial saint. Moreover, he was a sword saint. Unfortunately, their saint bodies were all ordinary saint bodies. There was nothing special about them. If they could condense a pure Yang saint body, their saint bodies would be even stronger. Under the condition of activating their saint bodies, their strength would increase by a lot. While Chumu was speaking, the bright red light emitted by the mystic Yang realm bead became very bright and dazzling. Immediately after, the mystic Yang realm bead slowly descended. It was as if it was tearing the space apart. The powerful energy shook endlessly. The elders immediately released their own energy to seal it, preventing the mystic Yang realm bead's energy from leaking out. Chumu wholeheartedly controlled it, trying his best to restrain the mystic Yang realm bead's energy. For a small world to be fixed, the energy that erupted was extremely tyrannical. It would directly cause a huge commotion. Even if Chumu and the others were to use their full strength, they would not be able to suppress it. Therefore, although Chumu planned to let the mystic Yang realm bead settle in the True Sword sect, he did not plan to completely fix it. He only wanted to place it there first. Otherwise, the huge commotion that could not be suppressed would cause fluctuations in the outside world. It would attract the attention of others and bring unnecessary trouble to the True Sword sect. Under the suppression of everyone's energy and Chumu's full control, the mystic Yang realm bead finally sank into the void and slowly unfolded the mystic Yang realm. The mystic Yang realm was a small world. It was a completely independent small world that was attached to a large world. After being refined into a realm bead, it could be carried around. It could also be unfolded and attached to a large world. It would take some time, but it was not long. Not long after, Chumu felt the mystic Yang realm unfolding completely. However, it could not be seen with the naked eye. Other than him, it was also difficult for others to sense it with their divine soul. Unless it was an expert with profound attainments in the Tao of space, it would be at least a 9-star saint or even a peerless expert. The Tao of space was a very high-end Tao of heaven and earth. There were not many people who had comprehended the Tao of space. There were even fewer cultivators who mainly cultivated the Tao of space. Moreover, there were very few cultivators who could cultivate the Tao of space to an extremely profound level. Therefore, the mystic Yang realm was relatively safe here. It would not be easily discovered. Moreover, as the master of the mystic Yang realm, Chumu would also set up some corresponding measures to isolate the detection of experts. The mystic Yang realm had not completely settled here. Therefore, other than Chumu, no one could easily enter or leave it. Regarding this point, Chumu already had some ideas. He wanted to create some tokens that could connect to the mystic Yang realm. By activating the power of the token, one could enter and leave the mystic Yang realm. However, Chumu had not done any in-depth research on the Tao of smithing. Therefore, he needed someone else. After speaking of this idea, the great elder volunteered himself. Sect Master, I have studied the Tao of smithing for thousands of years. I should be able to do it. The great elder said. Then I will have to trouble you, great elder. Chumu said happily. Rest assured, Sect Master. Leave it to me. The great elder who had lived for thousands of years patted his chest like a young man. Soon after, he revealed an embarrassed smile. Sect Master, but before that, can you let us enter the mystic Yang realm to take a look? Chumu smiled when he heard this. He waved his right hand and a light gate appeared. Chapter 1564. Chumu renamed the profound Yang Sword realm. Previously, it belonged to the great profound Yang Sword Palace, but now it belonged to Chu Mu. It belonged to the True Sword sect, so he had the final say on how to name it. Under Chu Mu's lead, all the elders entered the profound Yang Sword realm. After Chu Mu gave a simple introduction of the profound Yang Sword realm, all the saint-level experts temporarily stayed in the profound Yang Sword Palace to cultivate. The pure and dense pure Yang Qi made the elders who entered pleasantly surprised and excited. Chu Mu did not disturb their excitement and let them get used to it first. After they calmed down, they would discuss the application of the profound Yang Sword realm. If a small world was not fully utilized, it would be like a decoration. It was the kind of decoration that could not be known to others. It was useless. And if the True Sword sect wanted to develop and become stronger, it was closely related to the strength of the sect's elders and disciples. It was also closely related to the foundation of the sect. With an additional small world, the foundation would increase by a lot. Similarly, the foundation had to be fully utilized to increase its strength. Only then could it develop and maintain a foundation of hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. All the saint-level experts stayed in the profound Yang Sword realm to cultivate. Chu Mu also handed over the task of refining the profound Yang Sword token to the Great Elder and left the profound Yang Sword realm, because he had other things to do. After Gu Luankong and the other two saw the sword techniques, it was as if they had obtained a treasure. All of them went into seclusion to comprehend it. Chu Mu originally wanted to find them to discuss how to carry out the mission. After all, they were sword cultivators from the ancient god realm. Their purpose in entering the deep blue world was to find the world spirit and obtain the recognition of the world spirit. From there, they would open the protective barrier of the deep blue world, allowing the sword cultivators from the ancient god realm to enter and develop resources. Now, looking at the appearance of the three fellows, they probably did not have the intention for the time being. Thinking about it, Chu Mu decided to forget about it. The mission had to be completed in the end, but there was no need to be anxious because this mission was not easy. On the contrary, it was incomparably difficult. It was still unknown whether it could be completed. Putting aside the discussion for now, Chu Mu began to work on other matters. His objective for returning to the True Sword sect this time was to further develop the True Sword sect and increase the overall strength of the True Sword sect. As for his personal growth, he could only put it on hold for now. Thinking of this, Chu Mu decided to study the Tian Ho Mystic Codex. The condensation of his primordial spirit gave him a stronger comprehension ability. His super-strong learning ability was also an advantage. The return of the sect master, Chu Mu, had only caused an uproar in the True Sword sect at first, but it quickly calmed down. However, one could clearly feel that the cultivation atmosphere in the True Sword sect was much denser than before. Chu Mu was now the backbone of the True Sword sect. With him here, the disciples would feel different. Those who were in seclusion, while those who were cultivating as usual. Everything seemed normal. However, before Chu Mu entered into closed-door cultivation to study the heavenly puppet secret scripture, he sent out a piece of news. The new round of the Sword Sect's disciple competition was prepared to be held a month from now, and the exact time would be notified. At this moment, it was like pouring water into a pot of boiling oil. The atmosphere in the entire True Sword sect was incomparably intense. The cultivation atmosphere, which had already increased because of Chu Mu's return, suddenly intensified by several times. Disciples who were cultivating hard could be seen everywhere. Sword light could be seen everywhere. Some were cultivating alone, some were fighting, and some were attacking in group. There was everything one could think of. Everything has changed since the sect master returned. Yun Feng sighed. If he wanted to enter seclusion, he would naturally choose the profound Yang Sword world. Although the purpose of Chu Mu's seclusion this time was not to improve his cultivation, staying in the profound Yang Sword Hall to cultivate and passively accept the tempering of the pure Yang Qi was also quite beneficial to his sacred body. The Boundary Monument Hall was the place with the purest and densest pure Yang Qi in the entire profound Yang Sword Hall. This was because it was the center of the entire profound Yang Sword Hall, and also the center of the entire profound Yang Sword world. All the Yang Qi and pure Yang Qi would eventually converge here. It could be said that this was an end point and also a starting point. Chu Mu had the best cultivation effects here. Even if he did not take the initiative to cultivate, the pure Yang Qi that was everywhere would still temper his sacred body, imperceptibly tempering his sword origin, primordial spirit, and so on. The benefits were great. Chu Mu intended to use the Boundary Monument Hall as his exclusive place for seclusion. It would not be open to the public. With a thought, figures appeared in front of him. There were a total of 18 of them. These were all puppets. Back in the myriad ancient sacred city, there were a total of 18 one-star saint-level puppets in the first underground palace. After Chu Mu defeated them, everyone divided them. Later on, Gu Luankong and the other two each obtained a heavenly puppet. Those puppets were not of much use to them, so they simply gave them to Chu Mu. These 18 one-star saint-level puppets all had their cores destroyed by Chu Mu, so they could not be activated. The purpose of Chu Mu was to study them. Studying the Tao of puppets was a combination of theory and practice. It was not something that could be grasped just by comprehending the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual. One had to personally study the puppets, and in the end, personally create the puppet. Only then could one truly grasp it. Chu Mu intended to use these 18 one-star saint-level puppets for research purposes, to deepen his understanding and grasp of the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual. He calmed his heart and completely forgot about everything in the outside world. He focused on comprehending the manual. His strong comprehension ability allowed him to comprehend the manual without any resistance. The origin of puppets, the theory of puppets, the structure of puppets, the principles of puppets, etc. Everything was memorized and absorbed by Chu Mu, and turned into his own accumulation. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. Other than the part about heavenly puppets at the end, he had completely memorized and understood the rest of the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual. At this point, Chu Mu had officially embarked on the Tao of Puppet. If it was someone else, they would definitely not be able to do it so quickly. They did not have Chu Mu's foundation, nor did they have Chu Mu's superb learning ability and shocking comprehension ability. 10 days ago, the 18 puppets in front of him were just 18 puppets. 10 days later, there was a completely different feeling when he looked at the 18 puppet. The structure and lines of every part were clearly presented in Chu Mu's eyes. This feeling was like a swordsmith and a non-swordsmith looking at a treasured sword. When a swordsmith looked at a treasured sword, he would look at the shape, length, width, thickness, hardness, toughness, material, method of forging, and even the lines on the surface of the sword. On the other hand, non-swordsmiths would not consider so much. To them, whether the sword was sharp enough or not was enough. Chu Mu's gaze was as sharp as a knife as he analyzed the puppets in front of him at a deeper level. The cultivation of the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual had allowed him to officially embark on the Tao of Puppet. However, this did not mean that he had already achieved great success in the Tao of Puppets. In fact, Chu Mu could only be considered as a beginner in the Tao of Puppet. However, compared to the majority of beginners in the Tao of Puppets, Chu Mu had various advantages that they did not possess. His superb learning ability and astounding comprehension ability belonged to the last and most comprehensive inheritance of the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual of the ancient puppet sect. All these advantages allowed Chu Mu to progress faster and gain a deeper understanding of the Tao of Puppet. Furthermore, he also had a saint-level puppet as a reference. He could analyze it and combine the theory with the real thing to learn more directly. With a grab, one of the puppets flew towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu looked it up and down carefully, studying every part of it carefully. He then combined it with the theoretical knowledge he had obtained from the Heavenly Puppet's secret manual to analyze it. These puppets were a test left behind by the last successor of the ancient puppet sect. They were puppets that had been created to be rather perfect. The structure of every part was very particular. Chu Mu carefully studied the appearance of the puppet. When he was almost done with this one, he gained some insights and continued to study another one. He studied one puppet after another. Before long, he had finished studying all 18 of them. He had gained a deeper understanding of a small portion of the theory. Afterwards, Chu Mu's fingers began to move. They were extremely nimble as they quickly swept across one of the puppets. After studying the exterior and the proportions of every part of the puppet, it was time to study the internal structure of the puppet. However, to study the internal structure, just observing with the power of the soul was not enough. He had to dismantle the puppet into every single part. Only then would he be able to study it in a more direct manner. Chu Mu's fingers were extremely nimble, but he did not dare to relax at all. Strictly speaking, this was the first time he had dismantled a puppet. He was using the Tao of puppets instead of brute force to destroy it. The significance of the two were completely different. The former required a sufficient understanding of puppets, as well as the corresponding theoretical knowledge as a foundation, as well as a unique insight and nimble hands. The latter only required sufficient strength. Chu Mu's eyes were extremely sharp. They shone brightly. He poured out his power of the soul at a high intensity and carefully controlled it. He did not dare to relax at all. He was very strict, extremely strict. This was his attitude. Either he did not do it, or he did it to the best of his abilities. One by one, the puppet components were dismantled by Chu Mu's nimble fingers. They were not damaged at all because once they were damaged they would not be complete. It would be even more difficult for him to study them. It didn't take long for a complete puppet to be reduced to a pile of components of varying sizes. After dismantling a puppet himself, Chu Mu became even more familiar with the structure of the puppet. Sweeping his gaze across the pile of components on the ground, Chu Mu did not immediately begin studying the component. Instead, he looked at the other puppet. His nimble fingers continued to dismantle the other puppets. After some time, the remaining 17 puppets were also dismantled by Chu Mu's nimble hand. They were placed in piles. Every time he dismantled a puppet, he became more familiar with the structure of the puppet. Next, he began to familiarize himself with every single component. Chapter 1565. Generally speaking, the appearance of a puppet could be divided into human form, beast form, and strange form. Human form and beast form were easy to understand. They looked like a human or a beast, while strange form was more general. Any non-human or beast form was called strange form. Different appearances of puppets had different structures, and the proportions of each component were different. Puppets could not be imagined out of thin air. They needed a certain physical reference as a basis, and then extended according to this proportion. The length, width, thickness, hardness, toughness, and other aspects of each component had to be precisely measured. Even a fraction less or more would be considered a failure. Those who cultivated the path of puppetry were called puppeteers. The types of puppets were divided into human form, beast form, and strange form puppeteers. Each type of puppet was a complete path, and was enough for many puppeteers to spend their entire lives researching. The ancient puppet sect was a supersect that mainly cultivated the path of puppetry, and involved all puppets. The Tian Ho secret manual also had the inheritance of 3 types of puppet. However, at present, Chu Mu only planned to cultivate the path of human form puppet. As for beast form and strange form, he would think about it when he had more time. The 18 one-star saint-level human form puppets were all dismantled by Chu Mu into component. Chu Mu then carefully studied each component. Human form puppets were constructed according to the proportions of a real person. Therefore, to become an excellent human form puppeteer, not only did one have to have extraordinary knowledge of puppetry, one also had to have a deep and detailed understanding of the human body. Chu Mu never lacked understanding of the human body. As a swordsman, the first thing he had to do was to understand his own body, the structure of every part, every bone, every muscle, how to move, how to exert force, and so on. This laid a solid foundation for his research on the path of human form puppetry. He studied each component one by one, combined with the theoretical knowledge of the Tian Ho secret manual, familiarity, and memory. After that, Chu Mu disrupted all the components and mixed them into a large pile. From among them, he identified the components needed to construct a puppet. This was another challenge, but not too difficult. The real difficulty had appeared. After selecting the components, he began to construct the puppet. There was a saying that it was easier to destroy than to build. The current situation was more or less the same. When dismantling the puppet, Chu Mu had used his spiritual energy to envelop the entire puppet, allowing him to see everything inside and out. However, when it came to fully constructed puppets, spiritual energy didn't have much of an effect. Staring at the pile of components in front of him, Chu Mu began to think and simulate in his mind. In fact, based on his memory of the previous dismantling, it was not difficult to reconstruct the puppet. However, that was not what Chu Mu wanted. That was just a rigid method. What he wanted was to understand and research the components, know their use, and know where they should be located, so that he could construct a complete puppet. With the combination of theoretical knowledge, the simulation in his mind became clearer and clearer. An hour later, Chu Mu's hands moved. He picked up a component and began to construct the puppet. The process of constructing was much slower than the dismantling process, but it was not difficult for Chu Mu. About an hour later, a complete puppet appeared in front of Chu Mu. After a careful inspection, he found that the puppet was very complete. There was not the slightest flaw, and it was exactly the same as before. Chu Mu revealed a smile. Once again, he began to select the remaining components and construct the puppet. Not long after, 17 one-star saint-level puppets were constructed. This process allowed Chu Mu to become more familiar with the construction of puppets. Next, Chu Mu dismantled the puppet and constructed it again, constantly familiarizing himself with the process. Dismantling the construct, and repeating the process over and over again, constantly familiarizing himself with the process. At the same time, his understanding of the path of humanoid puppets in the Tian Ho secret manual also deepened. A few days later, Chu Mu could not remember how many times he had dismantled and constructed a puppet. This was because he did not deliberately memorize it. He only knew that now, he could dismantle an intact puppet in a short span of 10 breaths, and he only needed 30 breaths to construct a complete puppet. It's time to move on to the next step, Chu Mu said to himself. The next step was not to take out other puppets for research. That was just a deepening of the previous steps, and not a new step. The next step should be to study the core. To a puppet, the core was like a human's heart. The heart supplied blood to every part of the body, providing power. The core dictated the puppet's actions, operation, and so on. The core of these puppets was a regular octagonal prism about the size of a fist. It was quite heavy and had a texture to it. Inside the core, there were lines that resembled blood vessels and meridians, which ensured the transmission of energy. In a complete puppet, the core was the most important and also the most complex. Chu Mu focused all his attention on the core. The shape of the core could not be arbitrarily chosen. There were strict rules about the most suitable shape. After all, it was related to the transmission of energy. If the shape was suitable, the transmission of energy would be smooth, and if the shape was not suitable, the transmission of energy would be blocked. This regular gem-like octagonal prism was the most regular shape of the core in the Tian Ho secret manual. It could be perfectly embedded in the puppet without any gaps, allowing the transmission of energy in many directions smoothly. It was fast, had little resistance, and had low consumption. Unless Chu Mu's attainments in the path of puppetry surpassed the founder of the Tian Ho secret manual, he would not be able to research a better core structure than the one he had now. For the time being, he did not have such thoughts. Chu Mu was immersed in the shape of the core, its proportions, and the internal energy circuit. The cores of these 18 one-star saint-level puppets had been damaged by his sword. When Chu Mu was almost done with his research, he also wondered if he could repair the cores. However, his current attainments were not enough. It would be very, very difficult to repair them. He continued his research and combined it with the theoretical knowledge of the Tian Ho secret manual. However, he soon got stuck. There was no other way. Chu Mu did not hesitate and directly destroyed one of the cores. After destroying it, he broke it into pieces so that he could better study the internal structure. Destroying one core after another, Chu Mu destroyed a total of 10 cores. Only then did he have a deeper understanding of the core. "It's time to try to create a puppet myself," he muttered to himself. He took out some materials that he did not think were very precious and began to create them. He melted the materials, purified them, and fused them together. Then, using his powerful spiritual power and the method of creating puppet components, he created components from these purified and fused materials. This was his first time creating a puppet. Chu Mu did not bite off more than he could chew. Instead, he first created the components according to the proportions of the puppets that he had disassembled countless times. One by one, the components appeared under his nimble hands. Half a day later, a pile of brand new components appeared in front of him. The next step was the most difficult one, which was to create the core. Usually, one core per puppet was very important. Chu Mu's attainments in the core were still relatively shallow. He took out a piece of pure yang stone and used it as the center to construct the outer shape of the core. This was relatively easy and was done very quickly. The difficult part was the structure of the energy circuit inside the core. In order to completely come into contact with the pure yang stone, he needed to use his spiritual power and sword origin. The combination of spiritual power and sword origin was not a problem for Chu Mu. However, the energy circuit was very complicated and could not be constructed casually. There were many factors that had to be considered. Not long after, Chu Mu constructed a core. As for whether it would work, he did not know. It still needed to be tested. He constructed the components and finally embedded the core. In terms of appearance, this puppet's proportions were similar to a normal person's. Its appearance was ordinary and there was nothing special about it. This was Chu Mu's first puppet creation. After carefully studying the outer shape, Chu Mu nodded. For him to be able to do this for the first time, it was very good. He activated the pure yang stone's power in the core. The pure yang stone's power immediately passed through the energy circuit and spread out of the core. The puppet's dim eyes suddenly lit up. Just as the red light was about to shoot out, it suddenly trembled. It seemed that there was some obscure sound, and the bright eyes dimmed once more. He had failed. Chu Mu wasn't discouraged. For someone like him, who was a beginner in the path of puppets, to be able to reach this stage on his first attempt was unprecedented. Even in the ancient puppet sect, those extremely outstanding genius disciples couldn't do it. After taking down the core and studying it, he found that a dozen or so of the energy circuits inside had been destroyed. After carefully studying it, Chu Mu knew that the reason those energy circuits were destroyed was because of the pure yang stone's power. The main reason was that the structure of the energy circuits was not perfect enough, so they could not withstand the power of the impact. If he knew the reason, he would know how to improve it. Chu Mu once again took out the materials to create the core. No matter what path one cultivated, one needed to have the spirit of research and a peaceful attitude. There was no need to fear problems, only problems that could not be discovered. The first time he constructed the core, he failed because the strength of the energy circuits was not enough. They could not withstand the impact of the pure yang stone's power. Of course, if he used a weaker energy stone, things would be better, but Chu Mu planned to do even better. The second time he constructed the core, he also failed because of the energy circuits problem. The strength was improved, barely enough, but it was not stable enough. The third time he constructed the core, he also failed because the energy transmission could not last for a long time. He failed 5 times in a row, all because of the energy circuit. Failure after failure didn't affect Chu Mu. Instead, it allowed him to delve deeper into his research. After the 6th time he constructed the core, Chu Mu embedded it into the puppet's body. It was located in a place similar to a human's heart. Then, he used a component to seal it and protect it. There was anticipation in his heart because he had a feeling that this time, he would not fail again. The pure yang stone's power was stimulated. As it circulated through the energy circuits, it immediately spread throughout the puppet's body. The puppet's eyes lit up, emitting a sharp light. Chapter 1566. If I can cultivate here, I'm sure I'll be able to form a pure yang saint body in 100 years. An elder of the true sword sect said in the profound yang sword hall. He had been here for quite some time now. Every day, he would absorb the pure yang qi to cultivate. He could feel his sword essence, his blood qi, his physique and his primordial spirit being tempered by the pure yang qi, becoming increasingly pure. The effects of the blood qi and physique were the most obvious. They could feel the improvement in just a few days. It was more stimulating than usual. I've been stuck in the 6-star saint realm for more than 100 years, but I haven't been able to break through. It's not that I don't want to break through, but I'm limited by my primordial spirit. The first elder sighed. His cultivation talent wasn't very good, but it was still okay. He was able to achieve what he had today because of luck and hard work. However, he couldn't break through due to the limitations of his primordial spirit. He smiled excitedly. It's different now. With the refinement of the pure yang qi, my primordial spirit will be able to break through to the 4th level within 10 years. At that time, I'll be able to break through to the 7th level of the Aeon realm. 1st to 3rd level primordial spirits were black iron primordial spirit. 4th to 6th level primordial spirits were bronze primordial spirit. If a low-level saint wanted to break through to the mid-level saint realm, he would need a 2nd-level primordial spirit. If a mid-level saint wanted to break through to the high-level saint realm, he would need a 4th-level primordial spirit. The elders were overjoyed when they heard the first elder's words. Once the first elder broke through to the 7th level of the Aeon realm, he would be a high-level saint realm expert. The strength of the true sword sect would increase a little. Currently, the true sword sect was a quasi-second-rate power. However, if the first elder's cultivation broke through to the 7th level of the Aeon realm, the true sword sect could be considered a second-rate power. Even if it was the weakest of the second-rate powers, it would still be better than a quasi-second-rate power. Congratulations, First Elder. Everyone congratulated him. All of this is thanks to the sect master. Without the sect master, there wouldn't be the true sword sect now, the first elder said. In the Boundary Steel Hall, Chu Mu was standing. There was a figure in front of him. The figure was walking faster and faster until he started running. Soon after, it waved its hands and twisted its body, making all sorts of movements. At first, his movements were a little stiff and uncoordinated, but as his movements gradually became more proficient. It was a puppet that Chu Mu had personally created. It was also the first product that Chu Mu had made after stepping onto the path of puppetry. The thought stopped and the moving puppet paused, becoming a statue. Chu Mu couldn't help but be speechless. Although the puppet was successfully constructed and could move, it was different from what he had imagined. It actually required him to control it before it could truly move. Chu Mu also accepted the reality. After all, the earliest puppets were like this. They needed to be controlled before they could move. After that, there were puppets that could move on their own. After that, there were puppets with spiritual intelligence. After that, there were heavenly puppets. It was not surprising that Chu-Mu, who had just stepped onto the path of puppetry, was able to create the lowest level of puppets. Furthermore, this puppet was only equivalent to the level of a divine condensation realm cultivator. Firstly, Chu-Mu's ability to create puppets was still relatively low, and secondly, the materials used to create puppets were relatively ordinary. He continued to research and create puppets. After a few days, Chu-Mu created a new puppet. His technique had improved and was even more perfect. Its strength had reached the level of a low-level nirvana realm cultivator, but it still required his own will to control it. However, it was still an improvement. As time passed, Chu-Mu continued to research and create puppets, one after another. With his powerful learning ability and incomparably high comprehension ability, Chu-Mu had a higher efficiency no matter what he learned or comprehended. Time flew by quickly. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed since Chu-Mu entered the Boundary Steel Hall to comprehend the heavenly puppet mystic canon. This month was a month that was in full swing. The disciples of the True Sword sect worked very hard in their cultivation. Because of the motivation of having a direct goal, their improvements were very obvious. Within the profound Yang Sword Hall, the spirit of the martial saints seemed to have improved quite a bit. Each of them had been in the eternal realm for at least 100 years, and some had been in the eternal realm for thousands of years. They had never cultivated any primordial spirit secret technique, nor had they cultivated in any place that could help in tempering their primordial spirit. They had relied on their own efforts and the accumulation of time. Using the improvement of their cultivation base and their usual hard work to drive the progress of their primordial spirit, the effect was very weak. Now, after continuously absorbing pure yang qi for a month to temper their primordial spirit, they naturally felt that the effect was very obvious. The tempering of their primordial spirit had clearly improved, as if their potential had been unlocked. That feeling was very good, and their spirit had also strengthened. Inside the Boundary Steel Hall, figures stood one after another. They were the puppets that Chu-Mu had created. There were a total of 9 of them. These puppets were at the Divine Condensation Realm, low-level Nirvana Realm, mid-level Nirvana Realm, and the last one was at the high-level Nirvana Realm. This meant that Chu-Mu was becoming more and more proficient in the creation of puppets. Most importantly, Chu-Mu had entered the second step in the creation of puppets, which were puppets that did not have intelligence but could move on their own. Although the puppets of the second step could move on their own, there were limitations. After all, they did not have intelligence. However, it was enough for battle. Such an achievement showed that Chu-Mu had made great progress in the Tao of Puppets. The research of the Tao of Puppets had come to an end for the time being. Chu-Mu came out of seclusion and announced that the sect's grand competition would be held, as scheduled, in half a month's time. Following that, he said a few words of encouragement to the disciples, as if he was giving them a shot of adrenaline, making them even more excited. Gu Luankong and the other 2 had also come out of seclusion, but they were now in seclusion again. There was nothing special that needed Chu-Mu to deal with, and there was no news in the outside world that was worth paying attention to. Chu-Mu wandered around outside for a while, then re-entered the profound Yang Sword world, and went to see the elders first. Sect Master. The elders hurriedly bowed to Chu-Mu. No need for formalities. Chu-Mu smiled and said, "Elders, your complexions have become better this month. It's all thanks to the profound Yang Sword world that Sect Master brought back." The great elder sighed. Then, he took out a few dozen tokens and gave them to Chu-Mu. "Sect Master, the first batch of tokens is done." "Yes, just refine this batch for the time being," Chu-Mu said. Then, Chu-Mu mobilized the power of the profound Yang Sword world and divided it into a few dozen strands. He wrapped the dozens of tokens and began to refine them. Not long after, the tokens were completely refined. They all turned golden red and emitted pure yang energy fluctuations. Chu-Mu handed over a dozen tokens to the elders. Refine them. In the future, you will be able to freely enter and exit the profound Yang Sword world from the coordinates left behind in the sect master's Great Hall. Chu-Mu said. In addition, in half a month's time, the sect's grand competition will begin. Elders, you will have to be busy during this period of time. In addition, I will have to trouble you to organize these things. In the future, they will be the resources for the development of our true sword sect. After saying that, Chu-Mu's figure disappeared. In this place, he was the ruler. He could appear and disappear at will, leaving behind hundreds of spatial rings. As for what to do, it would be up to the elders to think about it. The hundreds of spatial rings blinded the eyes of all the elders. These were all the spoils of war that Chu-Mu had obtained over the years. He had already taken away those that were useful to him. Most of them were left behind. Next, Chu-Mu began to create a large number of puppets. He had an idea, and that was to create enough sword puppets. A portion of them could be used to guard the true sword sect, and a portion could be used as a training ground for the disciples to increase their combat experience. The first thing he considered was not to guard the true sword sect, but to use the puppets for training. Origin Realm puppets, God Condensation Realm puppets, and Nirvana Realm puppets. With Chu-Mu's current attainments in the Tao of puppets and his other abilities, it was not difficult to create 3 types of puppets. The components were constantly created, and the cores were also constantly created. There were millions of pure yang stones, and every single one of them contained an enormous amount of energy. It was completely comparable to the energy of a low-level Saint Realm expert, and was more than enough to power the Origin Realm, God Congealing Realm, and Nirvana Realm puppets. The Origin Realm puppets were the easiest to create. In just a few days, Chu-Mu had created dozens of them. They were divided into low-level Origin Realm, mid-level Origin Realm, high-level Origin Realm, and peak-level Origin Realm puppets. Next, he began to create God Condensation Realm puppet. Finally, he created Nirvana Realm puppet. God Condensation Realm puppets were also divided into low-level, mid-level, high-level, and peak-level puppet. Nirvana Realm puppets were divided into first sky, second sky, and third sky. Currently, the highest was seventh sky. Chu-Mu then spent some time studying the puppet array. The puppet array left behind by the Heavenly Puppet Secret Manual was very detailed. It was divided into 9 levels. Chu-Mu was studying the first-level puppet array. A first-level puppet array required 18 puppets of the same strength to form. However, this was not absolute. Chu-Mu discovered that the first-level puppet array could actually be simplified. Under simplification, although the power would be weakened, the number of puppets required would also decrease. Under his research, half a month passed very quickly. Unfortunately, the time was too short. Otherwise, he could create more puppets and further simplify the first-level puppet array. When the time was up, he had to come out of seclusion to oversee the situation and motivate the disciples. After the sect grand competition, he would spend some more time studying the Tao of puppets. At the very least, he would try his best to increase the defensive power of the true sword sect. When the time was up, the disciples began to mobilize. Previously, under Chu-Mu's instructions, the elders were very attentive. They wanted to make this sect grand competition even better than the previous one. The sect grand competition was still divided into 3 levels. They were the inner disciples, elite disciples, and core disciples. Each level was presided over by an elder. The sect grand competition was divided into preliminary, semi-finals, and finals. When the finals came, the 3 levels would take turns. Chapter 1567. The sect competition was held as scheduled. The process was not unexpected at all. It was very enthusiastic. In the sect competition held 2 years ago, Most of the disciples had just entered the sect and hadn't practiced the sect's sword techniques and so on. Their strength wasn't as strong as it was now. In addition, the true sword sect was only in the beginning stages of development. In all aspects, it couldn't be compared to now. Therefore, the sect competition this time was even more intense. The cultivation of the disciples was higher and stronger, so it was naturally more interesting and exciting. From the beginning to the end of the sect competition, it took a total of 15 days. Since it was a large competition, there had to be rewards. Only then would it be able to better motivate the disciples and stimulate their fighting spirit. The top 100 inner disciples, the top 30 elite disciples, and the top 10 core disciples were all rewarded. Moreover, the rewards were even more generous than the sect competition 2 years ago. Because in these 2 years, Chu Mu had killed many strong enemies and obtained a large amount of spoils of war. The weakest of these enemies was at the high level of the Nirvana realm, and many of them were Saint realm experts. Each of their collections were not bad, and some of them were very rich. When they were combined, the elders of the true sword sect were very shocked. They thought that their sect master had directly robbed a large sect. Of course, the collection of a large sect could not only be this. This was just an exaggeration, but it also showed how rich Chu Mu's harvest was. The top 3 of the inner disciples, elite disciples, and core disciples all obtained the qualifications to enter the spirit pool to cultivate. Chu Mu had already broken through and become a Saint realm expert of the eternal realm. The spirit pool was of no help to him, so he planned to leave it in the true sword sect as a reward for the outstanding disciples of the true sword sect. It would better stimulate the disciples' passion for cultivation, and also improve the disciples' sense of belonging to the true sword sect. The spirit pool was not placed in the profound Yang sword world. The profound Yang sword world was still an important small world that could not be known to the outside world, and could not even be known to the disciples. The spirit pool was also very important. It was enough to cause others to covet it. Thus, the location where the spirit pool was placed was rather secretive. Furthermore, there were 99 layers of seals. Even mid-level saints would not be able to break through it easily. As for high-level saints, they had their own pride. Under normal circumstances, they would not attempt to steal it. Of course, Chu Mu would also take further safety measures to ensure that the spirit pool was safe within the true sword sect. The spirit pool was split into 3 uses. This time, the top 3 inner sect disciples of the great sect competition were the first to enter. Because, when entering the spirit pool, it was best to be naked so as to better absorb the spirit energy. Considering the difference between men and women, the spirit pool was also sealed by Chu Mu. It was divided into 3 small sections, and each person entered one section without disturbing each other. They couldn't see each other, and their divine remembrance couldn't sense each other. When the 3 inner sect disciples came out of the spiritual pool, there was an uproar. Originally, the cultivation of these 3 inner sect disciples was at the peak of the great circle of the origin realm. It was possible for them to break through to the divine condensation realm, but they still needed some time. Unexpectedly, after cultivating in the spirit pool, not only did the 3 of them successfully break through to the divine condensation realm, they even reached the peak of the minor completion realm. They were only a step away from Deshang. Furthermore, the aura they emitted was very pure and stable. There was no sign of instability in their foundations due to their rapid advancement. It gave people the feeling that they had gone through a long period of hard work to cultivate and purify their sword energy. Aside from the rapid advancement in their cultivation, their physiques had also been strengthened by several times. Their strength was even more tyrannical than when they broke through on their own. These 3 inner sect disciples were also promoted to elite disciples because of the breakthrough in their cultivation. Then, it was the turn of the 3 elite disciples. They entered the spiritual pool and enjoyed the nourishment of the pure spiritual qi. Absorbing the spiritual qi to cultivate, their cultivation rapidly broke through. Their foundations were solid, and their physiques were even more tyrannical. The three elite disciples were originally at the peak of the great circle of the God condensation realm. After the three of them left the spiritual pool, their cultivation had all broken through and reached the middle stage of the first sky of the nirvana realm. In an instant they had saved several years of cultivation time. Moreover, their sword energy was pure, their foundations were solid, and their status as core disciples rose. Going from the peak of the great circle of the origin realm to the peak of the minor completion realm of the God condensation realm would only take about 2 years for a cultivator with decent talent. However, going from the peak of the great circle of the God condensation realm to the middle stage of the first sky of the nirvana realm would take at least 3 years. A single cultivation in the spiritual pool and a direct breakthrough was equivalent to saving 2 to 3 years of time. For cultivators with talent, 2 to 3 years was enough to leave their peers in the dust. Finally, it was the turn of the 3 core disciples. Among the 3 core disciples, 2 were at the peak of the 6th sky of the nirvana realm, while the other was at the early stage of the 6th sky of the nirvana realm. Seeing the improvement of the 6 inner disciples and elite disciples, their hearts were filled with anticipation. When a nirvana realm cultivator entered the spiritual pool, they would naturally consume more spiritual chi. The more spiritual chi they consumed, the more treasures they would consume. However, the 6 people who entered the spiritual pool the first 2 times had only absorbed a small portion of the spiritual chi. To them, spiritual chi was a very high-end energy. Their own cultivation was too low, so their absorption and refinement was limited. A small portion would be absorbed and refined to increase their cultivation, a small portion would nourish and strengthen their physique, and a small portion would be hidden within their bodies. As they cultivated and developed in the future, it would allow their cultivation to increase faster than usual for a period of time until the hidden spiritual power was exhausted. The remaining spiritual chi in the spiritual pool was enough for the 3rd batch of disciples to absorb and refine. It was different for the nirvana realm. Especially for the 6th sky of the nirvana realm, they already had enough ability to refine even more spiritual chi. When the spiritual pool was filled with spiritual chi, it was enough for Chu-Mu to advance from the 6th sky of the nirvana realm to the 7th sky of the nirvana realm. However, Chu-Mu was different from ordinary cultivators. His dantian had undergone a mutation and was 10 times bigger. The divine wilderness sword essence was incomparably pure. Therefore, the amount of spiritual chi that Chu-Mu consumed to break through to the first sky of the nirvana realm was enough for the 3/6 sky of the nirvana realm disciples to absorb and refine. The 3 core disciples had only been in the spiritual pool for a short day, but the heaven-earth yuan chi began to gather from all directions. It condensed into yuan chi clouds in the sky as they underwent the nirvana tribulation. The spiritual chi was extremely pure. Their physiques and meridians were far from being comparable to Chu-Mu's. They could only withstand a limited amount of spiritual chi and were unable to withstand it for a long period of time. Although it was only a short day, it was still longer than the previous 2 batches. The nirvana tribulation passed without any accident. The 2-peak 6th sky of the nirvana realm successfully broke through to the middle 7th sky of the nirvana realm, while the early 6th sky of the nirvana realm reached the early 7th sky of the nirvana realm. In just a few days, the 9 disciples had broken through to the nirvana realm. Their strength had improved tremendously, and it was obvious to everyone. Especially when Chu-Mu announced that the sect tournament would be held again in 3 years, and that the top 10 would be able to enter the spiritual pool to cultivate. All the disciples seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. The elders sighed with emotion. The moment Chu-Mu returned, he immediately caused the passion of the true sword sect disciples to rise by several levels. This was something that they could not do. With such a sect master, the true sword sect had nothing to worry about. In the blink of an eye, another month had passed since the sect tournament. During this month, other than creating puppets, Chu Mu also studied the puppet array and made obvious progress. He took out the other saint-level puppet. Among them, 15 were 2-star saint-level puppets, 12 were 3-star saint-level puppets, 9 were 4-star saint-level puppets, 6 were 5-star saint-level puppets, and 3 were 6-star saint-level puppets. These saint-level puppets were all intact. As long as the sword origin in the core that blocked the energy transmission was removed, they could be activated again. Next, Chu Mu spent another 2.5 months dismantling these saint-level puppets one by one. He carefully studied the structure of the components and the core. He discovered that the higher the level of the puppet, the finer the structure of the components. It was impossible to distinguish them with the naked eye, and the energy circuit of the core was even finer and more complicated. These 2.5 months could be said to be the time when Chu Mu had advanced by leaps and bounds on the Tao of puppetry. This was because he had even dismantled the 6-star saint-level puppets for research and reconstructed them based on his understanding of puppet. Just think about it. Which person who cultivated the Tao of puppetry would have the same qualifications as Chu Mu to dismantle saint-level puppets for research? Next, Chu Mu tried to create more puppets himself. This time, the puppets he created barely reached the level of 1-star saint-level puppet. It was a huge improvement from the Nirvana realm to the saint level. It was similar to the leap from the Nirvana realm to the Eternal realm. Such an improvement gave Chu Mu a sense of accomplishment. A sense of accomplishment was not a real thing, but it was still useful to a cultivator. At the very least, it could increase a cultivator's confidence. A cultivator without confidence would not be able to achieve anything great no matter how talented they were. After a period of consolidation, the puppets he created truly reached the level of 1-star saint-level puppet. Chu Mu created a few more cores and embedded them into the original 1-star saint-level puppets so that the 18 puppets could be used again. Chu Mu did not intend to go further on the Tao of puppetry. He mainly cultivated the Tao of sword. He had already spent a few months on the Tao of puppetry. It was enough for him to personally create 1-star saint-level puppet. Next, Chu Mu had to consider how to make better use of these puppets. Keeping them in his hands was just a collection. Only by using them could the value of these puppets be brought out. There were a total of 6 types of puppets from 1-star to 6-star. In the case of forming a puppet formation, they could display a more powerful strength that could at least cross 2 stars. In other words, the strongest 3 6-star saint-level puppets could form a level 6 puppet formation that had the strength of an 8-star saint-level expert. In the entire True Sword sect, there was not even a 7-star saint-level expert. There was no doubt that this was a huge power. Chu Mu had to make good use of it. Chapter 1568. There were 6 levels of puppet formations. A level 1 puppet formation was suitable for 1-star martial saints, while a level 6 puppet formation was suitable for 6-star martial saints. There was a strict distinction between the levels of puppet formations in the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Manual. If the puppet's level was not high enough, it would not be able to withstand the operation of the puppet formation of the corresponding level. On the other hand, if the puppet's level was higher than the puppet formation's level, it would require more puppets. For example, if a 6-star martial saint puppet was to set up a level 5 puppet formation, it would require 6 6-star martial saint puppets. The final strength would be at the level of an 8-star martial saint. However, because of the difference of 1 level, it would require double the number of puppets. If a level 6 puppet formation was used, 6 6-star martial saint puppets would be able to set up 2, which would be equivalent to 2 8-star martial saints. After thinking about it, Chu Mu made a temporary arrangement. 3 6-star martial saint puppets would form a level 6 puppet formation to guard the spiritual pool. The spiritual pool was not very useful to an individual, especially for those below the Eternal realm. The limitations were obvious. However, it was very important to a sect. Even for a super sect, their disciples were mainly at the deity condensation realm and nirvana realm. The spiritual pool's usefulness was obvious. As for the remaining saint puppets, Chu Mu temporarily used them as a place for the sect's saint experts to cultivate. A level 1 puppet array formed by 18 1-star saint level puppets would have the strength of a 3-star saint level. This would allow the 3-star saint level experts in the sect to fight well. Correspondingly, a level 4 puppet array formed by a 4-star saint level puppet array could fight against a 6-star saint level expert. Next, Chu Mu used a few more months to create more puppets. Some of them were 1-star martial saints, while the rest were below the martial saint level. During this time, he had people open up a cave residence in the mountains. Chu Mu's idea was to use the Origin Realm, Deity Condensation Realm, and Nirvana Realm puppets to create a puppet trial ground. He would name it the Puppet Cave. The disciples of the True Sword sect could challenge the Puppet Cave. As long as they could pass through the Puppet Cave, they would be rewarded handsomely. That way, not only could they increase their battle experience and deepen their grasp of sword arts, they could also be rewarded handsomely. For the True Sword sect, the Puppet Cave was a clear sign of improvement. Led by Chu Mu and assisted by the other elders, after nearly a month of racking their brains, the Puppet Cave was finally completed. The 3 words Puppet Cave shone brightly above the entrance of the cave. They were personally written by Chu Mu, using the eternal spiritual sword to carve them. They contained the profoundness of the sword Tao. After returning this time, Chu Mu would also put in a lot of effort for the development of the real sword sect. After the completion of the Puppet Cave, he planned to temporarily let go. For example, how to operate the Puppet Cave, how to reward them, and so on. These were all left to the elders. As the master of a sect, he only needed to grasp the general direction. Inside the Boundary Steel Hall, Chu Mu was comprehending the last part of the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon. The reason why the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon was called the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon was because the last part was related to heavenly puppets. Chu Mu had not touched upon the last part of the Heavenly Puppet Mystic Canon until now. The content of this part was an introduction to heavenly puppets, their origins, their abilities, and so on. Following that was the structure of heavenly puppets, the creation of heavenly puppets, and a series of profound content. Strictly speaking, the structure of heavenly puppets was clearly different from ordinary puppets. Ordinary puppets generally only needed one core, and the interior was firm. However, heavenly puppets were hollow inside, and there was more than one core. The reason why it was different was because the creation of heavenly puppets was different from ordinary puppets. When the geniuses of the ancient puppet sect created heavenly puppets, their goal was to let people personally control heavenly puppets, allowing them to possess greater strength. Later on, heavenly puppets gained sentience, which was an accident. Because of this accident, the ancient puppet sect saw a possibility. After thousands of years of research, they finally came up with a method to give heavenly puppets sentience. This method was equivalent to a secret technique, the Burning Spirit Awakening Technique. This was the secret technique that gave heavenly puppets sentience. It was a rather peculiar and evil secret technique. Even though they had developed the Burning Spirit Awakening Technique, the ancient puppet sect could only create a few dozen heavenly puppets due to the limitations of materials. Furthermore, the success rate of the Burning Spirit Awakening Technique was not 100%. In addition, the method was rather evil. In the end, only a few heavenly puppets in the ancient puppet sect successfully gained sentience and became complete heavenly puppets. Chu Mu finished reading the contents of the origin and creation of heavenly puppet. He did not intend to create heavenly puppet. At least, with his current attainments in puppetry, he was far from being able to create heavenly puppet. If he wanted to reach that level, Chu Mu would have to be willing to spend a few decades on the path of puppetry. Furthermore, creating heavenly puppets required a large amount of precious metals. He had a portion of such metals, but he also lacked a portion. The key was the Burning Spirit Awakening Technique. There were two parts to the burning spirit awakening technique. One was the mantra and the other was the hand seals. The two had to work together for it to be effective. The reason why the burning spirit awakening technique was said to be evil was because it required the use of the primordial spirit. Yes, in order to give heavenly puppets sentience, the primordial spirit must be used as the raw material to execute the burning spirit awakening technique. The burning spirit in the burning spirit awakening technique meant to burn the primordial spirit. The primordial spirit was something that only martial saints possessed. It was the most important part of a martial saint and could not be missing. If the primordial spirit was burned, it was equivalent to complete death. Killing the primordial spirit was a rather evil method. Once the outside world knew about it, it would cause a lot of trouble. It might even become a public enemy and be besieged. Even with the ancient puppet sect's strength, they could not bear such consequences. Moreover, it might not be difficult to kill a martial saint as long as one's strength was much stronger than the other party. However, if one wanted to capture the other party's primordial spirit, the difficulty would increase by 100 times. Lastly, the burning spirit awakening technique had a success rate. If one's luck was good, one might be able to successfully awaken the heavenly puppet once and give birth to a trace of sentience. If one's luck was not good, one might need to use it twice, thrice, 4, 5, or even more than 10 times. The amount of primordial spirit consumed was immeasurable. With Chu Mu's ability, although the burning spirit awakening technique was profound and mysterious, he still managed to learn and grasp it in a short period of time. After familiarizing himself with it, Chu Mu took out 3 heavenly puppets. After obtaining the ancient puppet sect's inheritance, he obtained a total of 7 heavenly puppets. He gave one to Gu Luankong and the other 2. He planned to keep the heavenly puppet that he named Tian Huang first. The other 3 heavenly puppets had no other use at the moment. They could be used to awaken sentience and become real heavenly puppets. The 3 heavenly puppets were lined up in a row. Chu Mu did not need to go out to hunt for primordial spirits because there were more than 200 primordial spirits hidden in a side hall of the profound Yang Sword Hall. With a thought, more than 200 primordial spirits appeared in the Boundary Monument Hall. Chu Mu did not know how many primordial spirits would be needed to awaken 3 heavenly puppets and give birth to a trace of sentience. Perhaps more than 200 primordial spirits would be enough, or perhaps not. However, he had to give it a try. He took a deep breath and adjusted his breathing. He adjusted his essence, energy, and spirit to the most perfect state. Then, he recalled the contents of the burning spirit awakening technique and began to cast it on one of the heavenly puppets. As he waved his hands, he formed a series of hand seals. His sword energy and spiritual energy circulated according to the unique mental cultivation method of the burning spirit awakening technique, turning into a brand new energy. That energy was restless, as if it could ignite everything. Immediately, a primordial spirit flew up and was struck by the power of the burning spirit awakening technique. It burned as if it was ignited. Gradually, it turned into a pure energy and spread out, wrapping around the heavenly puppet that used the soft sword. Wisps of pure energy wrapped around the heavenly puppet like smoke. It was as if it was in the clouds, adding a bit of mystery. Soon, the first primordial spirit was completely burned. However, the heavenly puppet did not show any signs of sentience. Chu Mu could only immediately burn the second primordial spirit and continue. Third, fourth, fifth, one after another, the primordial spirits were burned. Wisps of smoke lingered. Finally, the heavenly puppet's lightless eyes flickered and quickly dimmed. The 6th primordial spirit was burned. Finally, the light in the heavenly puppet's eyes flickered. It was very weak, like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. However, it stubbornly persisted in the end. After the 6th primordial spirit was burned, the light in the heavenly puppet's eyes was weak. Chu Mu immediately smiled. Success. Under the nourishment of the 6 primordial spirits, the heavenly puppet finally gave birth to a sliver of sentience. The burning spirit awakening technique would not have any effect on other puppets. It was only effective on heavenly puppets because the structure of heavenly puppets was different. It could be said that the burning spirit awakening technique was a secret technique created based on the special structure of heavenly puppets. The burning of 6 primordial spirits had enlightened a heavenly puppet with a sliver of sentience. Chumu's luck was pretty good. As soon as he relaxed, Chumu discovered that he had used up a lot of energy. He could not use the burning spirit awakening technique a second time. He could only recover first. After a heavenly puppet gained sentience, its sentience would slowly grow with the passage of time. This would often take a very long time, decades or even centuries. However, if he continued to burn the primordial spirits and nourish the sliver of sentience, he could greatly shorten the time. After his energy had completely recovered, Chumu used the burning spirit awakening technique a second time. This time, he burned 7 primordial spirit. It ended in failure. Chumu's sword origin and spiritual energy were almost exhausted. He recovered once more and continued using it. The third time he used the burning spirit awakening technique. He burned 7 primordial spirits and still failed. After adjusting his state of mind and recovering his energy, he used the 4th level. This time, he burned 5 primordial spirits and successfully enlightened a second heavenly puppet. There was only one left. At this point, he had enlightened 2 heavenly puppets and burned a total of 25 primordial spirit. There were still over 200 primordial spirits left. Looking at the situation, it was enough to enlighten the last heavenly puppet. Incidentally, I would like to recommend a book written by a friend. It is called Sovereign of 10,000 Swords. 16 years ago, the #1 expert of Heavenly Sword Continent, Shirley, perished in the God's Fall mountain range. The dazzling sword of Gojoseon was on the verge of collapse. The 5 sovereigns were separated from the world. 16 years later, a foolish youth of Cloud Sea Academy awakened his past life's memories. The sword sovereign, Shirley, returned with a mighty force. This was a prosperous world where 10,000 swords rose. Geniuses were destined not to be lonely. This was a turbulent era where heroes contended for hegemony. The weak could only be obliterated. An azure-clothed youth with a black sword case in hand rose from the lowest position. Let's see how he overturned the winds and clouds, sweeping through the sovereigns and becoming the sovereign of 10,000 swords. Chapter 1569. Over 200 souls had been reduced to around 150 in the end. He had only succeeded in enlightening the 3rd heavenly puppet after expending an extremely large amount of souls. The 3 heavenly puppets stood before him. The eyes of each heavenly puppet flickered with a weak light. It was the light that represented intelligence. The 3 heavenly puppets all possessed a sliver of intelligence now, but they were still unable to move because they lacked energy. Chumu took out a few dozen pure yang crystals and embedded them into the heavenly puppet. Each heavenly puppet had 18 pure yang crystals, creating a complete energy circuit. Although the pure yang crystals contained abundant energy and each crystal was comparable to the energy of a 7-star saint rank expert, they were still extremely powerful. 18 pure yang crystals were equivalent to the energy of 17 7-star saints. It was enough for the heavenly puppets to use for quite a long time. Even so, there would be a day when they would run out of energy. The heavenly puppets that had gained intelligence were different. They could use the energy within their bodies to cultivate, absorbing the energy of the world outside and converting it into their own energy. At the same time, they would gradually change their state of existence, constantly improving themselves. As a result, their bodies would become stronger and the power they possessed would become greater and greater. However, that would take a very long time. They were puppets after all. No matter how extraordinary they would still have their limitations. However, compared to other puppets, these heavenly puppets had already surpassed them by far, far too much. They've only gained a sliver of intelligence right now. They can't move as they please, nor can they cultivate as they please. It'll take at least a few dozen years or even 100 years for this sliver of intelligence to become complete. That's far too long, Chumu thought. Afterwards, he looked at the remaining souls and made a decision. After recovering the energy he had expended, he used the Burning Spirit Awakening technique again. The Burning Spirit Awakening technique had two uses. The first was naturally to enlighten the heavenly puppets, allowing them to gain intelligence. The second was to burn the souls to nourish the sliver of intelligence in the heavenly puppets that had already gained intelligence, allowing the sliver of intelligence to grow faster and become complete faster. One by one, the origin souls were burned by the Burning Soul Spirit Awakening art. They turned into pure energy that wrapped around one of the heavenly puppets. As the origin souls burned and were nourished by the energy, the light in the eyes of the heavenly puppet that used the soft sword gradually brightened. This meant that its intelligence was also increasing. Chumu stayed in Boundary Steel Hall. Day after day passed. His essence divinities burned up one by one. When their energy was exhausted, they would recover. When they recovered, they would burn up again. This cycle repeated. Finally, after burning 100 primordial spirits, the light in the heavenly puppet's eyes reached a level that was neither weak nor strong. Chumu breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt his scalp tingle. If one were to divide the intelligence of the heavenly puppets, it could be divided into 4 levels: entry, small success, deshang, and great perfection. Reaching great perfection meant that the intelligence was complete, just like an intelligent human. When they had just gained a sliver of intelligence, the intelligence of the 3 heavenly puppets was already at the entry level. Now, after burning 100 primordial spirits, the intelligence of the soft sword heavenly puppet had risen to the next level. It had reached the small success stage, and had even reached the peak of the small success stage. It was only a step away from deshang. The peak of the small success stage was not enough. Chumu continued to burn the remaining 50 over primordial spirit. As they burned, they turned into energy to nourish the puppet. Suddenly, the eyes of the heavenly puppet shot out an extremely sharp light. It gushed out and then calmed down and became round again. Its intelligence had reached the level of deshang. "Master!" A voice sounded. The soft sword heavenly puppet's mouth moved slightly. It was a little stiff and a little obscure. Its voice was also not clear enough. However, Chumu could hear it clearly. The heavenly puppet's secret manual clearly stated that when a heavenly puppet with intelligence reached a certain level of intelligence, it would be able to speak. Speaking was a sign that a heavenly puppet's intelligence was beginning to mature. It was also the beginning of a heavenly puppet's ability to cultivate on its own. The structure of a heavenly puppet was very similar to a human body. After its intelligence matured, its eyes would be able to see like a human, and its mouth would be able to open and close like a human. It was completely equivalent to a metallic human. As for calling Chumu master, the reason was very simple. Whoever used the great art of burning spirit and awakening to awaken the heavenly puppet with intelligence would be recognized as its master. This was a method used to create the heavenly puppet. It was a setting and also a kind of mystery. In the future, you will follow my surname Chu and your name will be Tsongfeng, Chumu said with a smile. He was very excited. This kind of feeling could not be clearly expressed in words. Thank you for the name, master. The soft sword heavenly puppet's second sentence was smoother than the first. It was like a person who had just learned how to speak. At the beginning, he could not speak well. However, as long as he spoke boldly and was willing to speak, he would slowly improve. This was also applicable to the heavenly puppet. However, the process was shortened countless times. Your words are getting better and better. Chumu could clearly distinguish and smiled. All of this made him feel very familiar and very fresh. Thank you for the compliment, master. Chu Songfeng's eyes flashed slightly as he said with his mouth opening and closing. One was a heavenly puppet that had just been born and its intelligence had matured. The other was a heavenly puppet that had personally enlightened it so that it had intelligence that was not inferior to that of a human. One could imagine the excitement in his heart. The two immediately began to communicate. The heavenly puppet that had just been born with intelligence had almost a blank consciousness. It knew very little and needed someone to guide it. As Chu Songfeng's master, Chu Mu would naturally guide him. It was equivalent to laying a foundation of knowledge for him. In addition, Chu Mu was also very curious about how the heavenly puppet cultivated. It turned out that after the heavenly puppet was born with intelligence, it would gradually derive the most suitable cultivation method for them as their intelligence matured. For example, Chu Songfeng used a flexible sword, and the key to using a flexible sword was different from that of a normal sword. It was more flexible, more versatile, and more unpredictable. Thus, the cultivation techniques that he developed in the future would focus on flexibility, versatility, and strangeness. There was another factor that would affect the derivation of cultivation methods, and that was energy. The attribute of the energy crystal embedded in the heavenly puppet would more or less have that attribute. For example, the current Chu Songfeng was embedded with a pure yang crystal. Therefore, the cultivation method derived from it would not only have flexibility, but also the grandeur of pure yang energy. Master, in fact, pure yang energy is not suitable for us. Chu Songfeng said, the power that is suitable for me should be a power that can cooperate with my sword. For example? Chu Mu asked. I am not sure, Master. Chu Songfeng's tone seemed to be a little distressed. It was becoming more and more human. Chu Songfeng did not know, but as his master, Chu Mu naturally had to consider it. The heavenly puppets were very precious. The complete version of the heavenly puppet was even more immeasurable. It could cultivate on its own and had unlimited potential. In the future, it would not be difficult for it to become a peerless master. Chu Mu naturally valued it and could not be careless. Songfeng, if I remove the pure yang crystal from your body, will it have a bad effect on you? Chu Mu asked. Master, after removing the pure yang crystal, I will not be able to move for the time being. There will be no other effect. Chu Songfeng said, however, Master, you have to find a suitable energy as soon as possible so that we can improve better. I will do it as soon as possible, Chu Mu said. He felt that his shoulders seemed to have become heavier. He quickly took off the pure yang crystal embedded in the three heavenly puppets. He did not want the cultivation method derived from them to have the characteristics of pure yang energy while their intelligence was growing. Not everyone was suitable to master the power of pure yang. It may not increase their strength, but in turn it may weaken their strength. After removing the pure yang crystal, the heavenly puppets' eyes were still shining, but they could not move because of the lack of energy to support them. However, Chu Songfeng could still communicate with Chu Mu. Soft sword. Chu Mu closed his eyes and thought. Different swords had different ways of using them. Even if one practiced the same basic sword technique, it would lead to obvious differences in their sword. For a long time, Chu Mu had been cultivating the long sword, and he was most proficient in it. However, when his attainments in swordsmanship reached his current level, it could be said that he had reached the level where one sword could understand 10,000 swords. Therefore, in his mind, in the spiritual world, Chu Mu made a simulation. He used the power of his soul to construct his own figure. He reached out and the power of his soul condensed into a soft sword, and he began to cultivate. The soft sword technique focused on the three main keys of wiping, cutting, and entangling. However, those were only the most basic keys. In addition, the soft sword could be straightened in an instant and thrust out like a long sword. It also had amazing power. The moment the soft sword was straightened, it would produce a strong elastic force. It was so strong that it could shatter mountains. Therefore, the key to the soft sword could be defined as wiping, cutting, entangling, piercing, and entangling. At the same time, the soft sword was flexible and strange. It could also have the ability to confuse the enemy. After analysis, the soft sword had many advantages. However, Chu-Mu finally defined it as two types. Since it was a sword, it must be able to kill the enemy. Therefore, it must have a sharp edge. For example, the power of the spirit sword could make the soft sword more powerful. The other type was strange and flexible. Its lethality was slightly lacking, but it could confuse the enemy. It was better to entangle the enemy so that the enemy could not escape and was difficult to resist. In the end, they would be killed. The first type focused on power. The second type focused on changes. If it's the first type, it should be a crystal with a sharp edge. If it's the second type, it should be an illusory crystal. Of course, it would be better to have both types at the same time. However, it was very difficult and they might even weaken each other. After thinking it through, Chu-Mu planned to choose one of the two types. As for which type, it would depend on which type of energy crystal he obtained first. After all, both types were not weak and had their strength. Chapter 1570. Chu-Mu asked the True Sword Sect's Wind Trust Hall to release a message. The sect master of the True Sword Sect was interested in purchasing the light crystals, darkness crystals, illusory crystals, and sharpness crystals. Those who were interested could come to the True Sword Sect. As a rapidly developing quasi-second-rate sect, the True Sword Sect received a lot of attention in the Azure Water Dynasty. Therefore, the moment the news came out, it quickly spread throughout the Azure Water Dynasty and even spread outside the dynasty. As for Chu-Mu himself, he immediately made other arrangements after sending someone to spread the news. Yun Feng and Yun He, the two elders of the True Sword Sect, were now demoted to deacons. However, they were loyal to the True Sword Sect. When the True Sword Sect was weak, they had put in a lot of effort for the development of the True Sword Sect. They were people who had contributed greatly to the True Sword Sect. Chu-Mu gave each of them a Profound Yang Sword token, allowing them to freely enter and exit the Profound Yang Sword world. With good luck, the two of them successfully broke through to the early stage of the 8th heavenly layer. Chu-Mu allowed them to enter the spirit pool to cultivate. They would first raise their cultivation to the peak of the 8th heavenly layer, then enter the Profound Yang Sword world to cultivate and consolidate their cultivation, preparing to break through to the eternal realm. In the Profound Yang Sword hall of the Profound Yang Sword world, the two of them were so excited that their bodies were trembling non-stop. They were incomparably loyal to the True Sword Sect and were willing to pour their blood and sweat on the land of the True Sword Sect. Ever since Chu-Mu became the sect master of the True Sword Sect, the True Sword Sect began to break away from its previous predicament and rapidly develop. This made them feel happy and excited at the same time, but at the same time, they felt depressed and powerless because their cultivation was too low and their strength was too weak. In front of the rapidly developing True Sword Sect, their strength began to seem insignificant. They could no longer contribute to the development of the True Sword Sect like before. This feeling was very uncomfortable. They understood their own talent. The peak of the 7th heavenly layer was almost the limit. Breaking through to the 8th heavenly layer was completely due to luck. But now, Chu-Mu had allowed them to cultivate in the spiritual pool. In a short time, their cultivation could rise to the peak of the 8th heavenly layer. After that, they could enter the Profound Yang Sword world to consolidate their breakthrough to the eternal realm. The rich and pure Yang Qi of the Profound Yang Sword Palace intoxicated them deeply. When they recalled what Chu-Mu had told them, their hearts trembled. "The two of you can break through without worry," the second elder said to Yun Feng and Yun He. There was a certain amount of danger in breaking through to the eternal realm, but with the protection of an expert, the danger could be reduced. Furthermore, the pure Yang Qi in the Profound Yang Sword Hall was pure and rich. Without the interference of baleful aura, it was even safer. "I really envy the two of you," Xizhang, who was prepared to protect them, said. This was because if Yun Feng and Yun He succeeded in breaking through to the eternal realm, their saint bodies would be pure yang saint bodies, which were much stronger than ordinary saint bodies. They would also be able to stimulate the power of pure yang, making them even stronger. Unlike them, their saint bodies had already been confirmed long ago. Fortunately, they could cultivate in the profound Yang Sword Palace frequently, and one day, they would be able to obtain a pure Yang saint body. In addition to Yun Feng and Yun He, Chu Mu had originally planned to give the 10 esoteric disciples the profound Yang Sword token to obtain the qualifications to cultivate in the profound Yang Sword Hall. The 10 esoteric disciples were the most outstanding disciples selected by Chu Mu and the True Sword sect. There were only 10 spots, and they were regarded as the seeds of the True Sword sect. High hopes were placed on them, and they deserved better treatment. However, the current profound Yang Sword world was still a secret of the True Sword sect. It was still a secret that couldn't be known by the outside world. Among the 10 esoteric disciples, there were a few who had some background, such as the prince of the Kanglan dynasty. If they knew about the existence of the profound Yang Sword world, it was hard to guarantee that the forces behind them wouldn't know about it. For the time being, the True Sword sect didn't possess enough strength to guard the profound Yang Sword world. Therefore, they could only temporarily prevent the 10 esoteric disciples from knowing about the existence of the profound Yang Sword world. However, Chu Mu had made other compensations, and that was the pure Yang stone. Every esoteric disciple had received 100 pure Yang stones as a reward. The energy contained within each pure Yang stone was comparable to the energy of a 1-star peak saint expert. 100 pure Yang stones were equivalent to 100 1-star peak saint experts. As for the 10 esoteric disciples, the highest cultivation was only at the early stage of the 9th heavenly layer of the Nirvana realm. There was still a huge gap between them and the immemorial realm. After receiving the reward of 100 pure Yang stones, every esoteric disciple was extremely excited. It could be used to temper one's blood and qi, strengthen one's physique. It could also be used to temper one's sword origin and nourish one's primordial spirit. In short, the pure Yang energy contained within the pure Yang stones had many benefits. Its value was immeasurable. Chu Mu went into seclusion again. Before he went into seclusion, he gave Gu Luankong and the other two a profound Yang Sword token each. They could freely enter and exit the profound Yang Sword world. The development of the True Sword sect was on the right track, and there was no need for him to keep an eye on it. Within the boundary monument hall of the profound Yang Sword Palace, Chu Mu began to stop cultivating for nearly a year. The early stage of the first heavenly layer of the immemorial realm was only the starting point of the immemorial realm. It was the lowest level of existence. Of course, Chu Mu's true strength was far beyond that. It was shocking, but it was still not enough. It was very difficult to raise one's cultivation. The higher one's cultivation was, the more time it would take to raise one's cultivation level. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least 10 years to raise one's cultivation level from the early stage of the first heavenly layer of the immemorial realm to the middle stage of the immemorial realm. In a good cultivation environment, if one's cultivation talent was outstanding, the time would be shortened. However, it would take at least 2 to 3 years. During cultivation, Chu Mu continuously absorbed and refined the pure Yang Qi. A portion of it nourished his primordial spirit, a portion nourished his saint body, and a portion nourished his sword origin. After a few hours, Chu Mu didn't feel any improvement. This was normal. Next, it was time to practice the sword. Basic sword techniques were indispensable. Even when he was studying the puppet Dao, Chu Mu would take some time to practice the basic sword techniques a few times every day. It didn't take much time. He comprehended the sword universe, the cloud-piercing sword style, the Dao-beheading sword style, and the other top sword styles. Right now, I don't lack offensive sword styles. Chu Mu pondered while comprehending. The 3 sword styles of the stab formula plus the self-created cloud-piercing sword style, the 4 sword styles of the sever formula plus the self-created Dao beheading sword style. He had a total of 9 offensive sword styles. However, these 9 sword styles were all close-range attack. Defensive sword styles or long-range offensive sword styles. Chu Mu pondered. Among the 30 top sword steels he had comprehended, some were theories. They were similar to the sword truth that he had created. There were only 20 sword styles that could be considered true sword styles. Among them, there were 3 sword styles of the stab formula, 4 sword styles of the sever formula, and 13 sword styles that Chu Mu hadn't comprehended yet. Among these 13 sword styles, 3 were long-range offensive sword styles, 2 were defensive sword styles, and 1 was a defensive counterattack sword style. There were a total of 6 sword styles. Chu Mu had to make a choice from these 6 sword styles. For a long time, Chu Mu had been focusing on offense. Even when facing the enemy's attack, he either met force with force or dodged. He also blocked, but it was just an ordinary block. Sometimes it wasn't so easy. After thinking about it, Chu Mu finally made a choice. A defensive sword style. Now that he didn't lack offensive sword styles, a defensive sword style might be able to play a miraculous role in battle. Of the 2 defensive sword styles, one was known as the immovable Wisdom King sword style. When executed, it was as if one had grown countless arms and countless sharp swords. No matter which angle the attack came from, it would be intercepted without any blind spots. The other defensive sword style was called the Thousand Weeping Willow sword style. Different from the Akalanatha sword style's absolute interception, the Thousand Weeping Willow sword style focused on weakening the enemy's attack. Once used, countless sword light would circle around the body like weeping willows. It could continuously weaken the enemy's attack until it disintegrated into nothingness. These 2 defensive sword styles each had their own unique point. They were both extraordinary. If used, it would definitely cause many experts to fight for it. Of the 2 defensive sword styles, Chu Mu chose the Akalanatha sword style first. Since he had made a choice, the next step was to comprehend the essence of the sword style and cultivate it. The ancient sword Dao had the true meaning of sword stab, true meaning of sword slash, true meaning of sword defense, and so on. The defense in the true meaning of sword defense meant defense. The sword was a lethal weapon. It could be used for both offense and defense. It all depended on how it was used. Chu Mu cultivated the Akalanatha sword style and planned to comprehend the true meaning of sword defense. In this way, the power of the defensive sword style would increase greatly. It would also be of great help to the defensive sword style that he would create in the future. After comprehending, he began cultivating with the Eternal Spirit sword in hand. He raised his hand and struck out. In an instant, countless illusions appeared on Chu Mu's arm. Following that, countless illusions appeared on the sword in his hand. They circled around him. It looked like Chu Mu's body had grown many arms. Each arm held a sword, giving people the feeling that they would not know where to start. Apart from cultivating the Akalanatha sword style, Chu Mu also planned to take some time to cultivate the 3rd ring of the Rainbow Ring, the Yellow Ring. The Rainbow Ring was a primordial spirit defensive mystic technique. It was suitable for a level 7 primordial spirit to cultivate. Currently, Chu Mu's primordial spirit was at the peak of level 2. However, due to certain reasons, his peak level 2 primordial spirit was comparable to some weaker level 3 primordial spirits. Now, with the 30% boost from the black gold mask, it was completely comparable to an ordinary level 3 primordial spirit. Cultivating the yellow ring was no longer a difficult task. Every day, Chu Mu stayed in the Boundary Steel Hall to cultivate. Sword Origin, Sword Universe, Basic Sword Techniques, Cloud-Piercing Sword Style, Dao Cutter Sword Style. The focus was on the Akalanatha sword style. After cultivating the Akalanatha sword style to a proficient level, Chu Mu began to take some time to cultivate the yellow ring of the rainbow ring. In the spiritual world, the hands of the primordial spirit moved and mobilized the power of the primordial spirit to condense primordial spirit talismans. These primordial spirit talismans were yellow in color. Once they were condensed, they automatically flew out and stopped between the orange ring and the primordial spirit, floating in the void. The second primordial spirit talisman, and the third were constantly condensing. Chapter 1571. In the spiritual world, the primordial spirit sat in the center. At the outermost periphery, there was a red ring with the primordial spirit as the center. Inside the red ring, there was an orange ring that surrounded the primordial spirit. Inside the orange ring, there was a yellow ring that surrounded the primordial spirit. Chu Mu had already mastered the first to third rings of the rainbow ring. The third ring had a strong defensive power. Coupled with Chu Mu's extraordinary primordial spirit and the enhancement of the black gold mask, he could even withstand a level 3 primordial spirit attack mystic technique cast by a level 4 primordial spirit. The cultivation of the yellow ring was even more time-consuming than the red ring and orange ring. It took Chu Mu a full 3 days to complete. The fourth ring was a green ring, suitable for a level 4 primordial spirit to cultivate. Chu Mu tried it and realized that condensing a green ring talisman consumed more than half of his primordial spirit's power. Even after exhausting all of his primordial spirit's power, he could barely condense 2 green ring talismans. As for the cultivation of each ring of the rainbow ring, it had to be done in one go. If there was a break in the middle, the condensed primordial spirit talisman would automatically dissipate, which was equivalent to a waste of effort. Under such circumstances, Chu Mu could only give up on cultivating the green ring. He could only wait until his primordial spirit broke through the second level to the third level before trying again. The Boundary Monument Hall was the center of the entire profound Yang Sword realm. Its pure Yang energy was incomparably dense and pure, surpassing any other hall in the profound Yang Sword Palace. Even if Chu Mu did not cultivate a cultivation technique, he would still be passively nourished and tempered. If he took the initiative to absorb it for cultivation, the efficiency would increase by more than 100 times. Everyone was cultivating diligently. Inside the Boundary Monument Hall, Chu Mu held 2 swords in his hands. One was the Eternal Spirit Sword and the other was the Heavenly Holy Sword. As he waved his arms, the 2 swords seemed to be an extension of his arms, connected by blood. As he waved his arms, countless arms and swords seemed to appear around Chu Mu's body. He was like an immovable wisdom king. Immediately after, all the arms and swords disappeared, turning into threads of sword light that fell from the sky like a glowing weeping willow. As the threads of sword light flowed, they were like a water curtain. This move was the other defensive sword move, Thousand Threads Willow Sword move. After a period of cultivation, Chu Mu had already mastered the 2 defensive sword move. He was very proficient in them. The only thing he lacked was to comprehend the essence of them. These 2 defensive sword moves had one advantage, and that was that they could be used with a single sword, or they could be used with 2 swords. In the case of using 2 swords, it would be easier. Chu Mu's perception was very high, but now he encountered a problem, a bottleneck. Countless silk-like sword light disappeared. Chu Mu lowered his arms and started thinking. The best way to cultivate the defensive sword style should be in actual combat, defending against attacks. Thinking of this, Chu Mu immediately got to work. He took out the materials, and in the short span of a day, he created 18 one-star saint-level puppets and activated them. The 18 one-star saint-level puppets were arranged into a level 1 puppet array by Chu Mu, and Chu Mu was in the middle of the array. Chu Mu controlled his strength to be at the beginning of the 3-star saint level, and the 18 puppets in the level 1 puppet array could all attack at the level of the 3-star saint level. The 18 one-star saint level puppets and 18 swords continuously attacked Chu Mu. The power of each sword was at the level of the 3-star saint level. Chu Mu did not dodge or counterattack, but directly used the Akalanatha sword move to block and defend. The Akalanatha sword move and Thousand Threads Willow sword move were used alternately. When the Akalanatha sword move was used, it was as if it was rooted to the ground, standing firm, and blocking the attacks head-on. This sword move required the user to have a strong physique. Otherwise, it would be difficult to withstand the recoil. The Akalanatha sword move naturally had its mysteries. It was different from an ordinary head-on collision. The moment the move was used, one's strength would be strengthened by 10 times or more. Only then would one be able to withstand the enemy's attack head-on. The Thousand Threads Willow sword move was different. Its main defensive method was to weaken the attack. Countless thread-like sword lights fell down. Every attack that entered Chu Mu's body became faint and weak before disappearing. They were unable to cause any damage to Chu Mu. Congratulations to the two of you. From now on, you are the new elders of the True Sword sect. Chu Mu said to the two standing in front of him. If it weren't for the sect master, we wouldn't be here today. Yun Feng and Yun He's faces were filled with excitement as they spoke to Chu Mu. From the looks of it, they seemed to be younger, and their auras were stronger. They were fundamentally different from before. Yun Feng and Yun He had successfully passed the Aeon Tribulation in the profound Yang Sword Palace and become Sage Realm experts of the Eternal Realm. From then on, their lives were different from before. Although the two of them only had ordinary talent, and if they worked hard, the probability of passing the Aeon Tribulation was less than 1%. However, because of Chu Mu, their fates were changed. Breaking through to the Eternal Realm with cultivation at the peak of the 8th sky of Nirvana Realm was definitely better than breaking through to the peak of the 7th sky of Nirvana Realm. Moreover, they had passed the Aeon Tribulation in the profound Yang Sword Palace, and the energy they had absorbed when refining their bodies was pure Yang Qi. It was condensed into pure Yang Saint bodies. Unlike Gu Luankong and the others, Yun Feng and Yun He had obtained sufficient pure Yang Qi. Therefore, their pure Yang Saint bodies were complete. Of course, they were only at the lowest level of pure Yang Saint bodies, but they were much stronger than ordinary saint bodies. They could even use pure Yang Qi to fight. After being refined by pure Yang Qi, their primordial spirits had reached the intermediate level 1 primordial spirits, which was better than most people's beginner level 1 primordial spirit. Their comprehension had increased, and they had mastered the essence of sword skills. They had also grasped the first level sword force and became a true sword saint. Although Chu Mu was in seclusion, it wasn't to the point of death. He would come out every once in a while. After breaking through, Yun Feng and Yun He took charge of the Wind Trust Hall and Punishment Hall again. The Wind Trust Hall was in charge of collecting information. Chu Mu had instructed them to collect the deep blue sacred pearls, but they hadn't found anything. After being happy for a while, they got down to business. Sect leader, a new sect has appeared recently. It is called the Battle King sect. Its origin is mysterious, but it is developing rapidly. It specializes in targeting third-rate and quasi-second-rate forces. Yun Feng reported, until now, within the Kanglan dynasty, 30 third-rate forces and 10 quasi-second-rate forces have been subdued. Among them, 7 third-rate forces and 3 quasi-second-rate forces were not willing to submit. They were all destroyed. Battle King sect. Chu Mu was slightly shocked. 30 third-rate forces had been subdued, 10 quasi-second-rate forces had been subdued, 7 third-rate forces and 3 quasi-second-rate forces had been completely annihilated. The True Sword sect's current strength was only equivalent to a quasi-second-rate force. It has been less than a month since the Battle King sect appeared. They are very arrogant and overbearing. They either submit or destroy the sect. Yun Feng said, moreover, they only target third-rate and quasi-second-rate forces. They won't provoke second-rate, quasi, or first-rate forces. According to the information we've obtained, when the Warlord sect sets their sights on a force, They'll send a warlord's invitation, and the time of the visit will be written on it. They only target third-rate and quasi-second-rate forces. Chu-Mu nodded. In other words, it is very likely that our True Sword sect will receive a Battle King invitation as well. Yes, said Yunfeng. All right. If they send a Battle King invitation over, let me know, said Chu-Mu, giving Yunfeng a way to contact him. Chu-Mu took the matter of the Battle King sect to heart slightly. However, he did not pay too much attention to it because he still had other things to do. Every day there would be disciples going to the puppet cave, but even after a few months, no one had been able to break through the puppet cave. The puppets in the puppet cave had very strong bodies, and they had great strength and speed. They also had exquisite swordsmanship and knew how to coordinate with each other. Although no one had been able to pass through the puppet cave, all the disciples who did felt their combat strength increase. Their battle experience increased, and their grasp of sword skills deepened. The True Sword sect was growing at a slow but steady pace. Once someone reached the seventh firmament of the Aeon realm, the True Sword sect would immediately become a second-rate force. Currently, the True Sword sect did not have a seventh firmament expert, but it was not inferior to ordinary second-rate forces in any other aspect. As for Xia Zhenkong, although he was a 7-star sword saint, he was only a guest elder of the True Sword sect. He could not be considered a member of the True Sword sect. Chu-Mu entered the Boundary Steel Hall again to cultivate. Under the level 1 puppet formation, the 18 1-star saint puppets each had the power of a 3-star saint. They kept attacking from all directions. Chu-Mu held his sword with one hand. When he swung it, it was as if there were arms all over his body. Countless sharp swords blocked all the attacks coming from all directions. When they collided head-on, huge shock waves rippled out endlessly. If it was a normal block, Chu-Mu would not be able to withstand it. However, with the motionless Wisdom King sword style, he could immediately dissolve the shock waves after each block. It would not affect the next block at all. Chu-Mu seemed to be one with the Boundary Steel Hall. He did not move at all. Soon after, the sword technique changed and became the 1,000 Silk Weeping Willow sword style. Countless silk-like sword lights fell down and Chu-Mu, who was within them, swayed like a willow in the wind. He had already grasped the essence of the 1,000 Silk Weeping Willow sword style. Using 2 swords to perform the motionless Wisdom King sword style and the 1,000 Willow sword style was easier than using 1 sword. It also consumed less energy. However, using 2 swords was an extension of Chu-Mu's strength. 1 sword was the foundation. Day after day of cultivation, Chu-Mu came out of seclusion not long after. There was an unexpected surprise. One of the top 10 secret disciples, the Prince of the Kanglan Empire, gave Chu-Mu dozens of illusory crystals. However, Chu-Mu did not take them for free. Instead, he exchanged them with the same number of pure yang crystals. After receiving the illusory crystals, Chu-Mu embedded the 18 illusory crystals in Chu Tsongfeng's body. Chu Tsongfeng's intelligence had already reached the level of Deshang. With the support of suitable energy, he began to quickly derive a suitable cultivation method for him.